Hello, all my dear followers. Welcome to the 7th episode of What If Naruto Mastered the Forgotten Art of Sealing. I just ask that you leave your like and comment, and if you haven't seen the previous episodes, you'll find them in a playlist on the channel. Without further ado, enjoy.
Naruto was sitting in the Konoha council room after recovering from his massive injuries from fighting E. After returning from the mission, the village was in an uproar because Kumogakure kidnapped Hinata. Tsunade managed to contain the village from doing anything rash while Naruto healed. After waking up, Naruto immediately got up and left the hospital, successfully avoiding detection from the hospital staff. After discovering that Naruto was missing, everyone began searching for the blonde Gufukage. They eventually found Naruto in the Messenger Falcon area lying against the wall writing a note. Before they could do anything, Naruto tied the message to the bird he requested and sent it. When asked what was in the message, Naruto simply smiled before passing out from the pain. This can't go unpunished. There must be retaliation against them, Hayashi shouted, not in the least happy to hear about his daughter's kidnapping. We understand, Hayashi, but we can't rush into things recklessly, Tsunade stated, trying to calm the Hyuga clan leader. So what do you want us to do? Hayashi said with barely contained rage. My daughter is in their hands right now. Who knows what they're doing to her? I wouldn't worry about it, Naruto said as he leaned forward with a near-dead look in his eyes. I put a seal on Hinata and told her how to activate it. What this seal does is it creates a chakra bubble that keeps sucking in more chakra to make it stronger and bigger. I personally made that seal to protect Hinata if something like this happened. There's no way Kumogakure could break that seal without activating the failsafes in it. If you had enough time to place a seal like that, then why not place a transfer seal? Hayashi grunted. Because that would have taken longer, Naruto said, looking at Hayashi. Something I didn't have in Uzushio. What about the Uzumaki food? Danzo asked as he leaned forward to inspect Naruto closely. You don't really think she can live forever in that chakra dome, do you? Naruto smiled at that as he stood up and walked to the door. No, I don't. Naruto grabbed the door handle as he opened the door. But I had a feeling that Akatsuki would kidnap Hinata to force me to surrender. So I prepared enough food and water to last me 2 months. Naruto was about to walk through the door when he said one last thing that surprised everyone. Hayashi, I promise you I'll get Hinata back, but I don't want any help from Konoha. With that, Naruto closed the door, leaving everyone in shock. XXX. Naruto was barely outside when he was confronted by Tsunade. What the heck was that? Tsunade looked at Naruto while smiling. They know where your village is. Tsunade's eyes narrowed at Naruto's words. They know your village's strengths and weaknesses, but they know nothing about mine. I already had tricks and plans in place when I sent that hawk to my village. So that's what was on the scroll. Naruto smiled even bigger. I have to leave immediately to prepare my village. Naruto turned and found himself face to face with Sai. I wish to go with you. Naruto looked at Sai, who looked like he had just come from the war. You can't stop me, Sai yelled, grabbing his head from the headache he was getting. Danzo-sama placed me as Hinata's bodyguard, and as such, I must do everything I can to bring her back. Naruto thought about it for a few minutes before nodding and pointing towards the door. Naruto started walking towards the door when he ran into Jiraiya. So you're really going to do this alone? Naruto just looked at the ground as he continued past his teacher. Amigakure is where Akatsuki is, Naruto said as he passed by, but only got a smile from Jiraiya. I know. Naruto looked at Jiraiya with a questioning look. My network of spies finally tracked them down. But Naruto, are you sure about this? They think I did something I never did, Naruto said with autonomous rage. Then they go and take Hinata. The better question is what kind of state I'll leave Kumogakure in once I'm done. I understand why you're angry, Jiraiya said in a wise voice. But don't go there without a plan, and even if they don't deserve it, give them the chance to return it. Naruto looked at Jiraiya for a second before nodding his head. Jiraiya watched as Sai and Naruto began walking towards the door, while Tsunade walked towards Jiraiya. You're going to have someone following him, aren't you? Jiraiya stated in more of a statement than a question. Tsunade nodded as she turned towards the Hokage Tower to prepare a team to track Naruto and assist if needed. XXX. Naruto walked towards the forest as he cursed while looking up at the sky. We won't make it to Uchiha in time. Naruto then clasped his hands together as seals started to appear all over his body and around the ground in a 3-foot circle around him. I hate using this. It drains me. But I have no other choice. Naruto looked at Sai, who looked at him in confusion. After learning who my father was, I grew tired of using his Hiraishin no Jutsu, but I couldn't because it's a jutsu that requires precise chakra control. I have yet to gain that much control, but I'm getting better. I then created my own variation, but I can only use it once. So I placed the receiving seal on Uchiha that way if I need to, I can get there in a second. Now hold on. This is going to get tough. Sai grabbed Naruto's shoulder as Naruto started to glow until an orb of chakra surrounded them both. Arashabur-ka, Stormbreaker. Then, in a shockwave of energy, Naruto and Sai disappeared, leaving a single crater. XXX. In a cave a few miles from Amigakure, Madara was beyond furious. Not only did he lose 3 Akatsuki members, evidence pointed to Senji having something to do with Heiden's death. I told you we shouldn't have trusted him, Pain pointed out, but a quick glance made Pain realize now wasn't the time to test Madara's patience. Madara finally had enough, stood up, and with a single hand signal, Sasuke appeared in front of him. It's time we ended this, Madara said to Sasuke, who smiled as he walked out the door with Sasuke, Pain, and Konan in tow. Deidara, Kisame, and Zetsu, the last surviving members of Akatsuki, looked up to see the 4 entering the room. Hey, isn't that Itachi's little brother? Kisame asked as he looked the Uchiha up and down. Yes, Kisame. He will replace Itachi since he is no longer with us, Pain said as he looked at Deidara, who snarled at Sasuke with hatred in his eyes. But now we are going to business. The Akatsuki turned to see a very frail-looking man looking at them from an open window. Hello. My name is Senji's emissary Zetsumetsu. With that, Zetsumetsu dropped through the window and landed among the Akatsuki as they all pointed their weapons at the newcomer. How did you get in? Pain snarled at the man, who smiled back with an almost animal-like grin. Why did Senji tell me how to get in undetected? Zetsumetsu looked at Kisame, who looked back at him eager to fight. But with Senji gone, I'll finish the last mission he gave me. With a low groan, the man dropped his cloak and revealed his entire body wrapped in bandages. But before he could begin unwrapping it, Pain quickly stabbed the man in the stomach. I won't let you finish his order. Pain growled, but was surprised when the man smiled. But it's already started. Pain looked at the man's blood and saw that it was completely black. You see, my real name isn't Zetsumetsu, no, that's my nickname. My real name is Guka, Hellfire, Onasiki, Demon Gate. Madara's eyes widened as he reacted by grabbing Pain and throwing him away from Guka. When the drop of blood fell to the ground, everyone didn't realize what happened as a large explosion of fire blew them back. Guka emerged from the fire with his bandages burned off, revealing a body covered in scars and cuts. My clan has very dangerous blood. Some people called us Maki no Bakigeki, Hell Bombers, because our blood explodes into a massive incendiary bomb. It was then that he pulled out a kunai and turned the blade towards himself. The most interesting thing is that the more blood you spill, the bigger the explosion will be and the more intense the heat will become. I won't live long with Senji gone. You see, he was the one sustaining my life with his unique jutsu, but without it I'll die soon. So why not use it all? Madara's one eye widened as Guka stabbed himself straight through the heart and with the last of his strength made a diagonal slash. Madara watched as black blood spurted from the dead man. A giant column of flames erupted from the cave, disintegrating it in a few seconds and began to expand, leaving barely a bit of standing in its wake. Madara stood in the confines, clutching his eye as the vortex slowly faded away. Pain, Konan, and Sasuke stood by his side watching the fire die. Zetsu suddenly burst out of the ground carrying Kisame, who looked a little burned, but nothing he couldn't handle. Deidara, on the other hand, looked the worst of it all. Half of his body was burned with cracks already developing and spilling what little blood wasn't warmed and dried from his body. Pain watched as the fire died down and receded, leaving a deep crater. How did you know? Pain whispered to Madara, who looked at him. Oniseki was a clan before the hidden villages were created. Madara whispered back. But after the villages were formed, they began to die out. I never suspected Senji had managed to save one. Madara gritted his teeth in anger as he looked at the unconscious body. I'm getting more and more frustrated with this. At this rate, I'll have to accelerate my plans. XXX. Uchiha was in a peaceful state until a sudden explosion caught their attention. Everyone looked towards the source to find Naruto leaning against Sai for support. Gafukage-sama. The villagers gathered around Naruto as Sai helped him through the crowd. It was then that Haku approached the crowd, but Naruto waved him off. Naruto then proceeded to get off Sai and began moving towards the tower with one thought on his mind. Hinata, what's going on? Haku asked, looking at Sai. Kumogakure kidnapped Hinata, Sai said as he started walking towards the tower, leaving Haku in shock. XXX. We don't have enough forces to attack Kumo. Kakahiki still looked tired, but at this point Naruto had his full attention. We wouldn't last an hour against Kumo. Ishiki, Denpa, and Emitsuki were all staring at Naruto, who seemed to be struggling to accept what he had just said. If we go in there without any help, Uchiha could be destroyed again. So what do we do now? Naruto looked at everyone's faces and stopped at Ishiki. We could ask Suna and Konoha for help. Naruto gritted his teeth as he tried to think of a plan. I don't want this to turn into another great shinobi war, Naruto finally said through gritted teeth. I understand, but we may have no choice in the matter, Denpa announced, twirling his dagger. Perhaps I can be of help, came a mysterious snake-like voice, causing the four to turn around and draw their weapons. So we meet again, Naruto. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the cloaked figure until he saw his face. Kabuto. Naruto tightened his grip on his staff. What are you doing here? Or a better question would be, how are you here? Kabuto smiled as he tossed Naruto the paper Itachi gave him. Itachi gave that to me so I could find someone to help my condition. Kabuto smiled, and Naruto vaguely remembered Orochimaru. What did you do to yourself? Naruto lowered his weapon slightly as Kabuto stumbled a little. Well, after Orochimaru died, I knew Akatsuki would come for me. Kabuto finally started to fall, but a white snake burst out of his robes and broke his fall. So I managed to find what little skin remained of Orochimaru and grafted it onto my body to gain Orochimaru's power. But as you can see, I'm fighting a losing battle. Kabuto took a good look at the white snake before slowly removing his cloak. And Mitsuki looked away as the three men shuddered at what they saw. Kabuto's entire body was slowly turning into a snake. The only thing left that was human was his head, arms, and legs, but other than that, he looked like he could constrict you without much trouble. I never thought I'd say this, but I need your help. Naruto looked at Kabuto with some pity in his blue eyes. I don't know. Kabuto looked a little surprised by that. But I'll try. Everyone looked at Naruto with surprise in their eyes. The reason is that I believe everyone deserves a second chance at life. A fresh start in life so they can grow and learn from the mistakes they made in the last one. Naruto walked over to Kabuto, who stood at attention as Naruto drew out some ink. I won't be able to suppress his cells completely, but this should stop and reverse some of the transformation. Naruto began drawing on Kabuto, who stayed perfectly still as Naruto continued the process with Kakahiki, Ishiki, Denpa, and Emitsuki looking on. When Naruto finally finished, he walked back and watched his seals carefully. Are you done? Kabuto asked through gritted teeth as another white snake emerged from his back. Yes, but I must warn you. Naruto clasped his fingers together in the bird seal. This is going to hurt like hell. Before Kabuto could respond, the seals began to glow and Kabuto collapsed to the ground screaming at the top of his lungs. Naruto grimaced at the volume but maintained his focus as a black orb appeared around Kabuto, hiding him from view. Naruto began to sweat a little as the seal continued to drain his chakra, but Naruto didn't stop. Suddenly, Kabuto's screams stopped and the orb began to shatter. Kabuto slowly stood up as the orb shattered completely. Kabuto kept his eyes closed but had wrapped his cloak around his waist. How are you feeling? Naruto asked between breaths. Kabuto opened his eyes and revealed still muddy pupils. His body had returned to normal, except for his right arm, which still had snake scales, and his hair was much longer, reaching his shoulder blades. I feel great. Kabuto smiled at Naruto, making his face look predatory. Now what should I do? Kabuto flexed his right hand as he looked thoughtful. Ah, I know. Before Naruto could react, Kabuto grabbed him by the shirt and disappeared in a burst of speed. Ishiki, Denpa, Kakahiki, and Emitsuki followed after catching up with Kabuto as he headed into the nearby forest on the island. But just as he entered the tree line, he dropped Naruto. Naruto twisted his body and landed on the ground, narrowing his eyes at Kabuto as he landed in front of him. What are you after? Naruto said as Ishiki and the others managed to catch up. Well, I told you I can help you. Kabuto smiled at Naruto. I'm about to show you why. Kabuto suddenly clapped his hands and 4 coffins erupted from the ground. The lids fell off and revealed their contents to the rest of the group. Kabuto smiled even wider as he saw the shocked looks on everyone's faces. That's right. I've mastered Kuchios, Edo Tensei, Summoning, Impure World Resurrection. The 4 people inside the coffins were Sasori, Itachi, Orochimaru, and Hanzo. The jutsu that only 2 other people knew how to perform. The Nidaime Hokage, Orochimaru, and now I have surpassed them all. I heard what you said about not having enough human power. Well, with me by your side, you'll have all the manpower you want. Naruto continued looking at the bodies until he turned his gaze back to Kabuto. You're desecrating his memories with this. This caused Kabuto to laugh, confusing Naruto. You misunderstood what Edo Tensei is. Kabuto slammed the coffins together and the lids slammed shut. Yes, the jutsu allows you to bring the dead back to life, but unlike Orochimaru, who would remove an individual's entire personality to turn them into a killing machine, I don't want that. Kabuto reached behind him and pulled out 2 tags. The newest one is my creation. It will allow the person I resurrect to have their personality and some control over their actions. But the oldest one is Orochimaru. That still doesn't matter. This jutsu takes another person's life to use it. Naruto once again saw Kabuto laugh. Yes, for someone who hasn't mastered Edo Tensei. Kabuto held up his tag so Naruto could see. Naruto looked closer and found strange seals along the edges of the tag. I don't use random humans as sacrifices. I use people who had their minds broken by Orochimaru during his many experiments on them. They feel no pain, they can't eat except intravenously, and they can't even form a single thought. The only purpose they had for Orochimaru was for Edo Tensei. I also made a deal with Manda. I promised to make him even stronger than he is now if he listens to me. Manda agreed and the deal was sealed. I can't believe this. Naruto was still shocked even as the coffins sank into the ground. How can you just sit there and smile at the desecration of the dead's memories and kill others just for your own benefit? Kabuto didn't break his smile, but instead leaned a little closer to Naruto. Because if you accept my offer of help, I will only summon those who deserve to have their memories desecrated. Kabuto's silted eye seemed to contract in the light. Or perhaps I can summon someone who never got to say goodbye to a family member and let their soul be at peace. What do you get out of this? Naruto growled while Kabuto looked thoughtful. Well, I'm trying to find my true self, Kabuto said, his smile turning mischievous. So maybe helping you will help me discover myself. That, and I also have someone I want to have a rematch with. Naruto didn't need Kabuto to name the person. All right, I accept your help. Naruto grabbed him but tightened his grip. But you must not use Edo Tensei without my permission. Naruto looked at Kabuto. You understand. I understand. Kabuto watched as Naruto released his grip and turned to the others. We need to get ready, Naruto said as he walked with Kabuto right behind him humming a spooky little tune. I don't want to leave the village undefended. Naruto looked at Emitsuki who nodded. Kabuto, you'll be coming with me along with Kakahiki, Ishiki, Denpa, Sai, and if you have time Haku. Everyone nodded as they continued towards the tower once more. I'm coming, Hinata. Kabuto looked at Naruto with a small smile. I'll play the hero for now. Kabuto's thoughts began to plan for the next few days. And then I'll take care of Naruto and Sasuke in one swift and brutal move. Triple X. He was growing impatient as no one seemed to be able to break the barrier separating him from the Hyuga girl. Now it seems to be growing, isn't it? His assistant nodded. My guess would be that this thing sucks chakra from the surrounding area to increase its size and strength. He gave the barrier one last blow, but it didn't budge. Reikage-sama, may I suggest something? His assistant asked with a raised finger. He grunted, showing that he was listening. Well, if this seal is absorbing chakra from the various surroundings, why don't we move it to where there is less chakra? He looked at his assistant and smiled. How about we take her to Shimigame, Turtle Island? He thought for a few seconds before making a decision. Very well, she'll be moved immediately. The assistant nodded as a pair of ninjas entered and helpfully lifted the box containing Hinata. Make sure you arrive at the last minute today. The ninja nodded and ran out the open window. I finally have revenge for Yujito, he announced with a note of pride in her voice. And soon I'll even have the Byakugan. Today is a good day. He laughed a little as her assistant nodded. Triple X. Deidara was in a bad mood. Not only was half of his body burned, but the Uchiha boy didn't die from the explosion either. Zetsu appeared from the ground in front of them with a smile. I have something that might interest you all. This caught everyone's attention as they looked at the plant man. Apparently, Kumogakure thought Naruto killed Yujito, and as a result they kidnapped the Hyuga heir. Now Naruto will attack Kumo to get her back. Pain looked down with no emotion in his gray eyes, but they had a glimmer in them that could have been mistaken for happiness. Excellent, Pain said as he turned around. We can attack when they're weakest and take the Kyuubi and Hachibi before they even know what happened. Everyone nodded and watched Pain leave. Madara smiled in the corner as his plans would soon be complete. I'm so close. Madara looked at Pain. Pretty soon I won't be needing you, Nagato. With this, Madara laughed a little as his Sharingan began to swirl in his Mangekyo as a strange wind blew through the trees carrying Madara's laughter for all to hear. Kumogakure was quite a town. Even the guards played games to a certain extent. Playing a card, seeing who can hit a certain target the furthest, etc. Just as everyone was about to play another round of the various games, a figure began to emerge from the mist. The guards immediately stopped what they were doing and raised their weapons. The man was wearing a black cloak that completely engulfed him, with a raised hood and tattered tail. Identify yourself, one of the guards growled. Me? The man asked, looking around the landscape of barriers as if searching for someone else. I assume I'm the one you're talking to. All the guards responded by raising their weapons. I come representing Naruto Uzumaki in the hopes that we can bring Hinata Hyuga back home in peace. Oh really? The guards smiled at each other. Well, we have orders from our Reikage that anyone allied with Naruto Uzumaki is to be killed on sight. So I guess that's it. 4 dash. He never finished his sentence as a long blade ripped from the man's cloak and stabbed into his chest. How tragic, the man said as his hood fell away revealing Denpa's face. But I warned you there would be bloodshed. Tensaku, Sever of the Heavens, sailed back to Denpa causing the Kumo guard to fall off the rock he was standing on. Now who dies next? All of the Kumo guards jumped to attack Denpa as the snakes wrapped around him and began squeezing the life out of them. Now I can't allow you to kill him, came Kabuto's snake-like voice as he appeared from the ground with his right arm extended with snakes coming out of it. Naruto stepped out from behind Kabuto, showing no emotion towards the guards as they quickly fainted from lack of air. Should I finish them off? Kabuto took a step forward, but Naruto stopped him. No. Naruto walked over and placed a seal on all the guards. The seal will prevent them from waking up for at least 2 hours. Kabuto looked displeased, but released the guards from their snakes. Now come on, this time I'll do the talking. The group began walking toward the tall towers that warned them they were in Kumogakure. Kabuto, you remember the plan. Naruto turned to see Kabuto biting his thumb and making the appropriate hand signs. I'll take that as a yes. Naruto smiled at Kabuto, who simply slammed his hand on the ground, being consumed by the ensuing smoke. When everything cleared, Kabuto was now standing on a giant purple snake with clawed hands and legs. It had viper-like teeth, a cobra's hood, and a rattlesnake's tail. "Kabuto, you better have a good reason for summoning me," Manda hissed slightly angrily. "Yeah, we'll most likely have to fight 100 or more shinobi." Kabuto smiled at Manda. "And I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to test out Manda's new power." Naruto could tell Manda was thinking about Kabuto's words. "So be it," Manda hissed. "I'll help you. But if this is some kind of joke, I won't hesitate to devour you." Kabuto chuckled at Manda's threat and gave a hand signal, and Manda shot forward, sinking into the ground at an alarming speed. "Naruto, we need to talk." Ishiki spoke when Haku reappeared from his reconnaissance. "He still has one Jinchuriki left. His brother Kurabi, Jinchuriki of the Hachibi no Kyogyu, giant eight-tailed ox. How dash?" Naruto was interrupted by Denpa. "Because we actually investigated the place we're about to attack." Denpa raised an eyebrow and looked directly at Naruto. "We have to distract him anyway, or you'll never reach the rakeage." "Okay, we can dash dot. No, Denpa and I can handle Kurabi," Ishiki said as he cracked his neck. "You need your strength to fight E." Naruto was about to speak when he looked at Haku. "Okay, Haku, you can go with Kabuto. He might need your help." Haku nodded and jumped into the hole Manda had created. "So you're saying you can handle Kurabi? Trust us. We have many tricks up our sleeves." Denpa placed Tensaku over his shoulder and gestured for his brother to follow. "See you soon," Denpa called out as Ishiki began trying to sense Kurabi's demonic chakra. "Sai, I want you and Kakuhiki to follow from the sky to provide aerial support for Kabuto and Haku." Sai nodded as he and Kakuhiki took to the sky on an ink bird. Naruto looked at the tallest tower and sighed, knowing what would happen if he failed. Then, with a burst of chakra, Naruto leaped onto the nearest mountain and charged towards the Raikage's tower. Triple X. Haku finally managed to catch up to Kabuto and was now sitting on Manda's head, trying to catch his breath. "So, what's the plan?" Haku asked, earning a sinister smile from Kabuto. Naruto believes the Raikage might have moved Hinata from Kumo to a safer location. Kabuto looked at Manda, who was staring at Kabuto, but quickly looked ahead. "Your job is to make sure she can get to a higher level, that way I can find out if they did it or not." "And how are you going to do that?" Haku narrowed his eyes as Kabuto smiled even wider. "Oh, I have my ways." Kabuto said this as he grabbed the tube inside his pocket. Haku continued to stare at Kabuto as they headed towards their destination. Triple X. Ishiki finally stopped on a mountain overlooking a giant lake with mountains on all sides and a cave. "That's it." Denpa readied Tensaku as his brother leaped toward the cave. Ishiki landed right in front of the cave and stood his ground. "Come out, Kurabi." Ishiki shouted this just as a figure began to walk out of the darkness. "Now what's this?" "One," Kurabi asked as he popped his neck. "I've never seen you before." Ishiki smiled even wider as Kurabi moved a little closer. "I don't know." Ishiki narrowed his eyes and smiled. "Why don't you ask him?" Kurabi's eyes widened as a sword flew past Ishiki's head and headed straight for him. Kurabi grabbed one of his swords and brought it down, blocking the incoming weapon. Kurabi was pushed back slightly, but managed to stand his ground as he poured chakra into his feet. "So you didn't come alone?" Kurabi growled as he thrust the sword upward only to see it retreat back into the mountains. "So he's the long-range type, while this one handles the short-range one." Kurabi grabbed all of his swords and threw them into the sky only to catch them all in various places. "Let's see what you can do." Kurabi kicked the ground and began spinning like a ball towards Ishiki, who smiled a little. When Kurabi was in range, Ishiki began ducking and weaving, making it look like he was dancing. "This cat is fast, but why hasn't he attacked yet?" Kurabi's free foot touched the ground and Kurabi used this opportunity to spin in a new direction. Ishiki's eyes widened as he watched Kurabi go from spinning like a ball to a top in a second. Ishiki received a few slashes ranging from his cheek to his chest, but he began dodging the new flurry within a couple of seconds. "This doesn't make sense." It's almost as if Kurabi's eyes widened as Denpa appeared in front of him, pointing his sword at him. The blade shot forward, and Karabi had to stop his spin to block the attack. I'm impressed that not many people can block my sword. Denpa smiled at Karabi, who tossed everything except 2 of his swords back into their sheaths. And that's a good example of your prowess in Kenjutsu, sword techniques. I thought you specialized in long range while he specialized in point blank. Denpa finished for him with a smile. A lot of people make that mistake. Let me make it clear for you. My brother is more of a sensor and genjutsu guy than anything else. I'm the one who's the ninjutsu and kenjutsu guy. In other words, your brother finds his opponent. Karabi gritted his teeth as he charged his swords with lightning. And I'll finish them off. Denpa finished with a note of pride in his voice. I'm glad you've grasped the concept now. Let's fight. XXX. Naruto finally managed to reach one of the mountains right in front of the Raikage Tower before making his presence known. Naruto landed on a pole and released his chakra, causing every ninja to turn to look at Naruto, who was looking towards the Raikage Tower. Before any of the Kumo ninja could engage, Naruto appeared and looked at Naruto, who was standing on his perch. So you came. Naruto didn't reply but disappeared and reappeared, swinging his staff at E in a downward motion. The area E was standing in a moment ago turned into a crater big enough to fit a small house. I'll give you one chance. Naruto growled angrily. Give it back or I'll turn this whole place into rubble. E's eyes narrowed as Naruto stood up, still holding his staff. You think you can take on Kumogakure alone? He shouted as the ninja around the area began to draw their weapons. I'm afraid you find yourself outdashed. Naruto, with a shout of pure rage, swung his staff in a full circle, releasing a dome of slashing wind. The Kumo ninja were caught off guard by the sheer speed and size as they were all struck and thrown down the mountainside. He managed to disappear in a burst of lightning, but his anger towards the Uzumaki grew at that moment. No, I'm afraid you made the mistake. Naruto looked at E, his long hair casting a small shadow over his eyes. But what caught E's attention was that his left eye was pure orange. You unleashed a monster when you took Hinata. Some of the ninjas thrown off the mountain came back, but the others were either dead or knocked out. Now I'll ask you but one last time. Give me back Hinata, or I'll reduce your village to rubble. He waved his hand in the direction of the Kumo ninjas, telling them to fall back. So you want her that much? E's tone had a sort of mocking tone to it. I'll tell you what, if you can beat me, then you can have her back. Naruto narrowed his eyes as lightning began to dance along E's body. That's if you can hit me. E disappeared as Naruto quickly sealed his staff into the storage seal on his right gauntlet. E reappeared and threw a punch at Naruto, who glared at E with anger in his eyes. The area where the two collided crumbled down the mountainside, but the man's surprise was when the smoke cleared. E's fist was in Naruto's hand, which seemed to be surrounded by wind. I may not like it, but I have little choice, Naruto declared as he saw E's eyes widen in anger. Yes, this is your wind form jutsu. Look at Futon. Meijin no Miko, wind release, devil's maelstrom. Naruto pulled E's captured hand away and went to punch him, but he quickly disappeared. I have to admit he's pretty clever, he said through gritted teeth as he reappeared a couple of feet behind Naruto. Using Raiden's weakness in Futon to your advantage, and even went a step further by turning my best jutsu against me. It seems he doesn't have that much speed. At that, Naruto smirked as he raised his arm and swung it down as if he was using a sword. Suddenly, he felt something very fast fly past his face and turned to see a deep cut on his rook. I don't need to be fast, Raikage, Naruto announced with deep satisfaction in his voice. All I have to do is catch you once and it's over. Naruto then leaped up and charged at E, who just raised her hands. XXX. Kabuto peeked his head over the side of the mountain to see a small version of a twisted form. Now's our chance. Naruto distracted E. Kabuto whispered as he and Haku climbed out of the ground. Manda poked his head out of the ground, but Kabuto told him to stay hidden until they needed him. Manda didn't like order, but he went down anyway. Kabuto and Haku climbed the mountain until they reached the Raikage's window. When they appeared on the windowsill, they saw a woman being led out of the room by 12 guards. Now Ver should have the information we need. Kabuto smiled as Haku pulled out a scroll. XXX. We need to hurry. the oldest Kumo ninja said in a raspy voice. Reikage-sama wants you brought to safety. And Rai? Distant thunder. And Rai nodded and followed the man, but not before being stopped. Oh, and I wonder why she has to hide. Kabuto was standing directly in front of the Kumo guards with snakes coming out of his arms and coiled around his feet. The Kumo guards went to draw their weapons, but were hit by a small wave of water from behind. They turned to see Haku with a smile as she held up a single hand sign. Suddenly, ice covered everyone on top of their noses except for Kabuto and Enrai. Enrai looked at the two as they approached the girl. Now we have some questions for you. Kabuto smiled as he pulled out a small bottle with a syringe in it. XXX. Naruto punched a dragon made of lightning and watched as the wind began to cut into it. Just as the dragon disappeared, Naruto was forced to duck under a kick thrown by E. Naruto then reached above his head and grabbed E's leg in the blink of an eye, surprising him. I've had enough of you. Naruto spun E towards the nearby mountain and watched as it cracked. He opened his eyes to see Naruto already right in front of him with a punch already heading towards his chest. The mountain shook from the force of the impact until it slowly began to crumble. Naruto leaped out of the dust and rubble and began to scan the area for E, but was roughly grabbed from behind and thrown back down. Naruto looked up to see E chasing after him with mindless rage deep in his eyes. That's right, follow the leader. Naruto muttered to himself as he looked down to see the ground rushing towards him. Naruto twisted his body and landed on his feet, causing a small crater to form. But when he looked up, all Naruto saw was a flash of lightning before the area he was standing in turned into rubble. Naruto was thrown back as blood dripped from his mouth. You can't compete with my speed and power, he shouted as he charged once more. He's right. But this wind is taking some of the power out of his punches. Naruto thought as he raised his hands and started trying to block the punches. But each punch made Naruto grit his teeth in pain. All I have to do is keep this up for a few more minutes. Naruto then watched as he disappeared and quickly kicked him in the side of the head. Naruto looked back at Kumogakure just as a giant wind dome appeared, consuming the entire village except for the very top of the Reikage's tower. He watched as Naruto fell out of the air with a grin. Just to make sure we don't get interrupted. He let out a roar as he disappeared just as Naruto raised his arms to defend himself. XXX. And Rai was lying on the ground, her hair covering her face with Kabuto and Haku standing over her. So they took her to a shimigame. Kabuto looked thoughtful as he made his way to the window. They couldn't have gotten far, and a creature that size will move slowly. Kabuto then smiled as he looked out to sea. Manda! The tower began to shake as Manda slid down the tower and poked her head out to the view of the windows. I hope you like the turtle. Manda chuckled as she opened her mouth, and with a gesture, Kabuto and Haku entered Manda's mouth. I'm sorry, Reikage-sama. And Rai thought with very little strength in his body as he fainted. XXX. Denpa was roughly thrown to the ground before spinning to dodge Karabi's swung swords. But mid-spin, Denpa stopped and blocked Karabi's sword. You're not that bad, Denpa said with a smile. Thank you, the same can be said for you. The two stood a few feet apart to look at each other. Both were covered in cuts and gashes from the sword strikes, but Denpa was the one in the worst condition. Suddenly, an explosion caught them both off guard as they looked towards the direction of Kumogakure. It seems you two didn't come alone. Denpa looked over to see Karabi placing his remaining sword back into its sheath with a sigh. It's a shame because I was having a lot of fun, but now I'll have to end this. Denpa stood as straight as a post as a blast of chakra tried to push him back. Ishiki was forced to grab a nearby rock for support, but even with that he almost lost control. Denpa watched with narrowed eyes as Karabi was covered in a red cloak with 8 tails. Now it's time to party. Denpa raised his sword, took a ready stance, and nodded. Karabi got up from the ground and Denpa found himself staring at Karabi's forearm. Shit! Denpa exclaimed as he shot his sword towards a rock to his right to push him out of harm's way. Denpa grimaced as his shoulder didn't fully clear and was nearly shattered by the force. Denpa skidded across the ground before looking at Karabi right in front of him. Fuck me! Denpa pointed his tensaku at Karabi and narrowed his eyes as the blade stretched out and struck Karabi. But Karabi disappeared. Brother! Behind you! Ishiki yelled, causing Denpa to turn around only for Karabi to grab his face. Karabi smiled a little as he watched Denpa raise his sword, but Karabi quickly pulled Denpa away as it pierced through a rock with ease. Denpa fell to the ground with blood pouring from his mouth as he tried to get up, but collapsed once more. Karabi turned around and faced Ishiki, who glared at him with hatred in his eyes. "Now, why don't we?" Karabi stopped when Ishiki smiled at him when a voice was heard. "Tensaku." Karabi turned around to see Denpa standing there as his sword shot forward, but before it reached Karabi, several other blades began to appear out of the main blade. Karabi looked around as the blades continued to stretch and bend until they formed a cage around him. "I've got you." "How?" Karabi looked at Denpa, seeing no visible marks on him from their last confrontation. "I lied." This brought a confused look to Karabi. "I lied to my friend when I told him the only ability I knew of Tensaku was stretching and multiplying abilities. He has several other abilities, some of which I'll never use, but one that I never had a choice but to use. Tensaku is a sword that chooses its owner by personality, and then its abilities change depending on the sword's owner. Shinja had a cold and calculating personality, and as such, Tensaku's abilities changed to suit him. When I had this sword, I could coat the blade in poison of the same metal it was made of and could spread it very accurately. But then Tensaku came to me." Denpa's eyes flashed to Ishiki, who nodded and walked over to his brother without another word. "He had multiple personality disorder, and that's why Tensaku came to me. Out of everyone in the village, he had the most diverse personality." Denpa looked at his sword and saw a faint glow in it. "Looks like he's had enough time, Ishiki." Ishiki nodded as he grasped the blade. "Allow me to show you the true power of Tensaku." Suddenly, the glow hit Ishiki and Denpa, blinding Karabi for a brief second, but when he opened them again, he saw a single person. He had shoulder-length silver blue hair and was wearing Denpa's samurai leg armor. "Well, it's been quite a while since I fought like this," Yukaken said as he spun his arms around, but then he got a confused look that was later replaced by sadness. "Guess I'm the only one left." He reached out, pulled Tensaku from its sheath, and looked at his reflection. "But I guess it was to be expected." "What the hell are you?" Karabi finally asked, drawing Yukaken's attention to him. "I told you no." Yukaken simply placed his sword over his shoulder. "That every Tensaku owner had a different ability. Well, when I obtained this sword, my personalities began to split until I separated into two different people, Ishiki and Denpa. I guess you can say the sword was testing me to see which one was worth wielding. Now I did say that I was going to show you Tensaku's true ability." Yukaken raised the blade above him before bringing it down with a sinister glint in his blue eyes. As the blade touched the ground, it suddenly shattered, covering Yukaken with the pieces of metal until both of his arms were covered in metal. Karabi then watched in awe as the metal began to grow until Yukaken's arm was encased in the metallic substance. "This is the true power of Tensaku when wielded by me." Yukaken swung his arm and launched a barrage of swords that forced Karabi to dodge, but just as the attack stopped, he jumped out of the way as a tentacle made of leaves appeared underneath him. Karabi jumped and landed on the ground about 40 feet away from Yukaken, who simply stood there as his swords returned to his arms. "What are you?" Karabi asked as he continued to stare at the arms. "I am the sword," Yukaken replied as he looked at Karabi with a snake-like grin. "Now prepare to fight Karabi." Yukaken raised his arms and charged, his eyes filled with frenzied happiness. Kabuto smiled as he felt Manda quicken her pace. "We're getting closer." Kabuto smiled as he looked at Haku. "Remember, you bring the girl, and I'll take care of the guards." Haku nodded as they neared their destination. "We're here," Manda hissed without opening his mouth. This brought a smile to Kabuto's face as he looked at Haku, who nodded. Manda poked his head out of the water and opened his mouth to allow Kabuto and Haku to exit as he disappeared beneath the water's surface toward the giant island. "Now comes the fun part," Kabuto announced as Haku created an ice platform for the two to stand on. "XXX in the Shima game. This is pathetic," complained a thin man with a double-sided sword. "Why do we have to take care of this stupid box?" The man reading a book looked up and stared at his companion. Because we were ordered to kill Kongu, Thunderbolt. The man closed his book and looked at Kongu completely. If you have a problem with him, then talk to the Raikage. Kongu sweated a little thinking about that. Fine, stop complaining dash. He never finished his sentence as the entire ground began to shake. What the hell was that hekareki? Thunderclap? Kongu yelled as she pulled out her weapon. I think we have guests. Hekareki said as he stood up from the ground while taking out a scroll. Triple X. Haku and Kabuto looked up just in time to see Sai and Kakuhiki flying above them. So that's where they're keeping her? Sai asked as Haku nodded. So everything is going according to plan? Kakuhiki asked with a yawn. Yeah. Better than anticipated. Kabuto said as he jumped onto the bird along with Haku as they flew towards the Shimigame. Just as they arrived above the turtle, Manda slid along the turtle's body and began twitching to stop its movements. The group jumped and landed in some trees as they watched the wildlife begin to stir, unaware of what was happening. This is too easy. As soon as those words left Kabuto's mouth, the group was forced to dodge a lightning bolt. They looked over to see a group of 4 looking at them with mockery on their faces. Looks like we have some snakes here, boys, Hekareki said as he lifted a large hammer over his shoulder with ease. Everyone looked at the 4 men except Kabuto, who just smiled. You're right. This confused everyone as they watched snakes begin to sprout from Kabuto's right arm. I am a snake. When Kabuto looked at Kumo's group, they all thought they saw an image of a giant snake bearing its fangs at them. Now the only question is who dies first. Triple X. Karabi and Yukakin separated from each other, revealing deep gashes and cuts on their bodies. It's actually penetrating the Hachibi cloak. Karabi thought in amazement as he looked at Yukakin's now spear-like right arm. You certainly are a dangerous warrior. Why, thank you, Yukakin stated with a smile that made Karabi shiver. My name is Yukakin, by the way. Karabi nodded, not wanting to introduce himself since this man already knew his name. Now, how about we finish what we started? Karabi nodded as he prepared to attack. Yukakin simply stood there, not bothering to raise his arms as glittering pieces of metal rained down to the ground. Karabi charged in a burst of great speed, but Yukakin simply ducked under his outstretched forearm. As Karabi traveled above him, Yukakin thrust his spear upward in an attempt to impale Karabi. Karabi gritted his teeth as he sent an arm of chakra towards a nearby rock and twisted away from the blade. Yukakin returned to his feet, still wearing a smile of pure joy. His speed has increased to the point where I can barely land a punch. Karabi gritted his teeth as he tried to figure out what to do next. Yukakin took one look at Karabi's face and started laughing. Trying to figure out how I got here so fast. Karabi just stared at Yukakin with unreadable emotion on his face. Well, let me tell you. I said I had 2 personalities, right? One handled the fighting and the other handled the scouting. Well, now that my personalities have merged, so have their abilities. Yukakin waited to see if this had any effect on Karabi, and after about a second Karabi's face turned into one of surprise. That's right. I'm dodging you off speed. I'm sensing the trajectory of your chakra, which then allows me to track the direction you're heading. The moment you disappeared, I already know where you're going to reappear. Karabi nodded before smirking and Yukakin narrowed his eyes. What's so funny? Well, now that I know this version won't work, I'll have to move up in the world. Yukakin watched in amazement as Karabi's skin began to peel, turning the red chakra black, while he grew hooves and horns, making him look a little more like the Hachibi. Now it's time for the second act of my performance. Yukakin dropped into a fighting stance, but was suddenly thrown to his side by Karabi. Fuck, he's faster, Yukakin thought as blood sprayed from his mouth. He went to throw a spear at Karabi, but was grabbed by the throat and sent crashing into a wall by the bone-shattering force. Yukakin pushed himself away from the wall to see Karabi with a bull skeleton on his shoulder. Rariato, lightning plow hot sword. Yukakin gritted his teeth as the metal on his arms began to shatter. Karabi punched the wall hard enough to cause it to collapse on top of him. Karabi blew the rubble away with a simple roar and began searching for Yukakin's remains, but found nothing. Looking for someone, Karabi turned around to see a barrage of swords sent toward him. Karabi realized he couldn't dodge in time, but before the swords could connect, a large skeleton appeared, shielding him from the barrage. Karabi looked at the skeleton to see the tip of each of the blades stuck into it. What the hell happened? Karabi growled, looking at Yukaken, who smiled at him. Yukaken knew he sported wings made of swords, while his cape was now covered in swords covering every inch, making it look like armor. Well, I have a bad tendency to lie. Yukaken floated gently down to the ground. You see, Tensuke's power comes from its owner's personality, but I feel like he has two personalities. He has more than one true power. So let me be more specific with you. Tensuke has 3 powers that can be called his true power. The first was called Chiken, Earth Blade, Gekikagen, Striking Sea Blade. The second was called Tenken, Heaven Blade, Tenbatsu no Kami, Nemesis of the Gods, and the last and my personal favorite. Yukaken looked at Karabi thoughtfully for a few seconds before answering. I'll keep it a secret for now, but right now I need to show you the power of Tenken. Yukaken's wings spread out and began shooting swords into the sky. Karabi watched as the blades stopped in midair and spun until the tips faced him. Then, with alarming speed, they began to fly towards him, causing him to dodge as best he could, but as he dodged, he got closer and closer to Yukaken. Yukaken noticed this and took to the sky once more. Tenken's main ability is that it allows me to filter my chakra through my swords, keeping me above the ground. As long as you are simply on the ground, you cannot touch me. Karabi grabbed a large chunk of ground and threw it at Yukaken, who just brought his wings around him into a shield. Yukaken unfurled his wings and looked at Karabi, who was nowhere to be seen. What were you saying? Yukaken turned to see Karabi standing next to him with a bull skull in his fist. But just as Karabi swung his fist, a sword shot out of Yukaken's arm and stabbed him in the stomach. Karabi looked down to see that the blade hadn't pierced his cloak. But from the force of the attack, Karabi was sent sprawling to the ground. I'm tired of warning you. Yukaken turned to look at Karabi. Now, what else do you have? Karabi looked at Yukaken as his black cloak began to disappear. Brother won't be happy, Karabi said as his cloak turned red again. But I have no choice against someone like you. Yukaken suddenly tensed as he felt more of Hachibi's chakra beginning to flow out. Time to unleash the beast. Yukaken watched as Karabi began to grow tentacles and grow larger. Yukaken smiled nervously as he looked at Karabi. So that's Hachibi's true form. Yukaken watched as Karabi threw his head back and let out a thunderous roar. I'll take that as a yes. Yukaken prepared to fly out of Karabi's grasp, but before he could move, a tentacle had already grabbed him by the waist. For a big guy, he sure can move, Yukaken muttered as the swords pierced through the tentacle, but encountered some difficulty. Its skin's a lot tougher too. Yukaken was knocked out of his thoughts when Karabi brought his arm down in an attempt to crush him. Yukaken spun in the air to avoid the blow, but was unable to escape the shockwave and was sent tumbling into the side of a mountain. I'm sorry, but I'll have to end this now, Karabi said with a solemn tone in his voice. Karabi opened his mouth and began compressing chakra into his mouth as a wave of swords shattered the mountain to pieces. Kaiken, Devil Blade, Gekihen no Erasure, Storm of Cataclysm, came Yukaken's voice, though it now had an eerie tone. Karabi watched as the wave of swords lowered Yukaken to the ground. His body hadn't changed much, except now the swords protruded from his skin. This is my final attack. Kaiken absorbs a large amount of chakra to stay stabilized, but the slashing ability is magnified and multiplied to 1,000 blades. Karabi narrowed his eyes as he finished compressing his chakra. This is the final battle, Karabi. Karabi fired his chakra beam as Yukaken swung all of his swords toward the beam. XXX. Naruto and E stopped when a giant explosion shook the ground, and as they looked toward the source, they saw a bright yellow beam. Guess Karabi's making fun of himself, E thought with a frown. Denpa, Ishiki, please be careful, Naruto thought as he turned his attention to E, who still had lightning bouncing off of her body. Naruto charged at E, who met him halfway, causing the ground to crack before they separated from each other. E jumped into the air as her feet touched the ground and started to bring her leg down with an axe kick, but Naruto grabbed her leg and threw it to the side and sent E running up the side of a mountain. He blasted through just as Naruto's wind FUINJUTSU faded away. Looks like you're done. He smiled at the thought of finally getting his revenge on Ujito. Now the question is how to finish you off. Naruto smirked as he pulled out 2 tags and pointed them at FUINJUTSU, Haracian, Lightning Rod. He watched as the seals began to glow as Naruto launched them to the opposite side of him. He was about to question what it was when his Raiton armor was quickly ripped from his body and traveled to each of the tags. I told you, I didn't come here unprepared. I devised special tags that will collect Raiton Jutsu and seal them into the ground. How clever of you, he said through gritted teeth as this boy took away his ability to use Raiton attacks. But that still means nothing if you can't beat me in taijutsu. He pushed forward, alarming Naruto at his speed without his Raiton armor. Naruto opened his staff and brought it down just in time to block one of I's strikes. Naruto pushed with some extra chakra to push I back, but it didn't help much as I pushed forward once more. Naruto channeled his chakra into his staff as he swung it towards I's head, but I quickly ducked his head with a grin fit for a snarling demon as he delivered a punch to Naruto's stomach. Naruto spat out blood just as he turned and kicked him in the side of the head, sending him crashing into a rock. Damn. I should have expected him to be strong even without his Raiton armor, Naruto thought as he looked at I, who was standing with his arms at his sides. But his fists were firmly clenched, ready to attack at any moment. Suddenly, a force shook the ground as someone else arrived to fight. They both turned to see who it was, to see 2 figures, one being carried by the other. When the smoke cleared, Naruto saw Yukakin on Kurabi's shoulder, who quickly threw the man towards Naruto. Naruto caught Yukakin and gently laid him down for a closer look. His right arm seemed to be stuck in a lit flame and left there while there was barely anything left to cover his body except his armor. Naruto checked his pulse to find that he was still alive, but he was barely hanging on. Yukakin, what is he doing here? Naruto looked at Yukakin's left hand and saw Tensaku grasped firmly in his hand. What minute is Denpa's sword? So he never told you. Kurabi spoke, causing Naruto to turn his attention back to him. That Denpa and Ishiki are one person. That guy in front of you is both of them. Naruto sent Kurabi a slight glare, but turned his attention back to Yukakin. Guess this is the end. He charged at Naruto and threw a punch, but before the punch could land, a wall of sand appeared between Naruto and I. Leave him alone, Raikage, came a voice filled with anger. Naruto turned to see Gaara, Kakashi, Guy, Hayashi, Kankuro, and Temari. He's not responsible for what happened to Ujito. He looked at Gaara as he tried to free himself from the sand. Why should I believe that? Gaara continued to stare blankly as he spoke. Because during the time in question, Naruto was trying to rescue me. Gaara watched as I's look of anger turned to one of confusion. I was captured by the Akatsuki and my bijou was extracted. But if it weren't for Naruto, I'd be dead. What evidence do you have to support this? The response came from a new voice that neither side recognized. Because we wouldn't have this. Everyone turned to see an orange-haired Akatsuki member holding a blood-covered Kumo headband with a wavy pattern on his eyes. But the strangest thing was the fact that there were 6 of them. Now we will take the Jinchuriki. Naruto and Kurabi looked at each other and then nodded. Naruto grabbed Yukakin and threw it to Gaara, who surprised him as Naruto and Kurabi jumped towards Akatsuki. Naruto brought out his Kyuubi chakra as he went after Pain, who simply raised his hand. Naruto suddenly felt himself pulled back by an incredible amount of force as he was shoved back to the ground. Naruto looked up to see Shirato Azurapath raise one of his arms, which fired 3 missiles at Naruto. Naruto tried to get up but found his leg stuck in the ground. Naruto looked up to see the missiles coming closer, but before they could hit, a large figure appeared in front of him. The missiles exploded and the area became a crater. But when the smoke cleared, Kurabi stood in front of Naruto with his 8 tails swaying behind him. We need to work together to overcome this freak show. Kurabi looked at Naruto as he stood up and nodded. Devapath simply shook his head as he pulled out another headband and tossed it to Naruto, just like he tried to work with his toads. Naruto took the headband and turned it over to see that it belonged to Jiraiya. He was a fool like you. Everyone turned to look at Naruto, who was shaking uncontrollably. Now you're in pain. Naruto raised his head, and instead of having orange eyes, he had red ones from the ooze. Before anyone could stop him, Naruto jumped up from the ground and proceeded to grab the Deva path's face and continued forward. The other paths followed, with Karabi jumping in next while cursing Naruto's emotional breakdown. Gaara and the others were about to follow when three figures appeared in front of them. "I'm sorry, but we can't let you upset them," Madara said as Kisame took Samahata and rested the blade on his shoulder. "Isn't that right, Sasuke?" The hooded figure removed his hood to reveal Sasuke with much longer hair shielding the top of his eyes. Deidara should already be at the Shimigame dealing with Naruto's friends and capturing the Hyuga. The entire group seemed shocked by Akatsuki's information. "And who the hell are you?" he shouted angrily. "My name is Madara." Madara's single eye narrowed in glee. Madara Uchiha, XXX, Shimigame. The four Kumo ninja were all lying on the ground, unconscious. Haku had several cuts on his body. Kabuto was relatively okay. Sai was bandaging the cut on his arm, but Kakahiki was the worst of all. He had cuts and gashes on his back and chest, but his left arm hung limply at his side. "It's okay now." Kakahiki looked at Sai, but immediately looked up and saw a flying figure heading towards them. "I'll stop him," Kakahiki announced as he turned fully around to face the oncoming force. "Guys, get them and Hinata out of here." Haku was about to argue but was interrupted. "I don't need help, and besides I won't be much help up ahead anyway. So go get the girl. But do me a favor. Come back here so I don't have to do all the work." Haku, Kabuto, and Sai nodded as Kabuto summoned some snakes to get the four of Kumo out of harm's way. "I guess you'll have to feel the wrath of my art," Deidara shouted as Kakahiki glared at the blonde Akatsuki. "I'm sorry, but that would be very troublesome to deal with," Kakahiki announced as a barrier appeared around his left arm. "Now let's see what you can do, XXX." Devapath looked into Naruto's rage-filled eyes as he pushed down, sending him crashing to the ground, causing the earth around them to erupt upwards. Naruto landed on the ground as he looked at the Devapath as it slowly got up. "You are certainly strong, but my pain is greater." The rest of the paths finally caught up and surrounded the Deva as it slowly rose off the ground. Karabi spun in the air and landed next to Naruto. "You need to calm down." Karabi said this with a voice full of authority that made Naruto turn his gaze towards him. "I want you to take a good look at the chakra you're using." Naruto looked at his hand and saw that his entire right arm had changed from orange to red. "You may have pushed the Kyuubi's chakra away, but that doesn't mean you can't use your anger to withdraw it." Naruto began to slow his breathing and Karabi watched as Naruto's chakra changed from red to orange. "Now let's take out these losers." Naruto widened his eyes in determination. "It doesn't matter," Deva announced as he looked at Naruto. "The reason we didn't attack earlier is because you're weakened from your fighting. You'll soon know pain." XXX glared angrily as the rest looked on in surprise. "You can't be Madara, he died fighting the Shodai Hokage." Madara chuckled as he looked at Kisame, who smiled at Guy who was jumping on his feet. "I may have lost the fight, but I never died." Madara spread his arms as he continued to look at the group. "And here's your proof." Meanwhile, Kakashi was staring at Sasuke, who was staring back at him. "What are you doing, Sasuke?" Kakashi asked, a hint of anger in his voice. "Why are you with Akatsuki?" Sasuke just tilted his head with a crazed grin. "To get revenge on the Uchiha clan." Before Kakashi could ask what he meant, Sasuke was suddenly right beside him, swinging his sword at his waist, forcing him to dodge with Sasuke in hot pursuit. Madara looked on with a strange gleam in his eyes. "Now where were we?" Kisame pointed his sword at Guy and continued to smile as everyone else prepared to fight. Kisame and Guy disappeared, leaving Kankuro, Temari, Hayashi, Gaara, and behind to face Madara. 5 against 1 now, that doesn't seem fair. Suddenly, the ground behind him began to rise until it revealed a man with a flytrap on his shoulder. "Maybe we should even the odds, Zetsu." Zetsu replied, smiling at the group as they looked at the 2 Akatsuki members. Kakahiki watched as Deidara opened his hands and began throwing spider-like bombs toward him. Kakahiki raised his right arm as the spider bombs rained down toward him and snapped his fingers. Barriers appeared around each individual bomb, and they were thrown into the sea where they detonated. "You're going to have to try better than that," Kakuhiki said with a stifled yawn as Deidara glared at him. "How dare you capture my beautiful art?" Kakuhiki yawned in response and continued to stare at Deidara, waiting for his next attack. Deidara continued to stare at Kakuhiki until a wide grin appeared on his face. "Goodbye." Kakuhiki stared in confusion until something wrapped around his waist and pinned his arms to his sides. He looked down to see a tentacle attached to a clay squid. "Shit!" Kakuhiki was dragged beneath the surface until the water exploded upwards, scaring the Shimigame. "Well, now it's time to go find my target." Deidara began to fly in the direction Sai and them were going, but stopped when a barrier blocked his path. Deidara turned around to see Kakuhiki emerging from the water with a minor burn on his right arm. "We're not done here," Kakuhiki announced with no hint of exhaustion in his voice, his eyes filling with rage. Kakuhiki clenched his hand into a fist, and spikes launched themselves out of the square barrier toward Deidara, who quickly flew away. Kakuhiki followed, and the spikes followed as well, but Deidara quickly took out several bird bombs and threw them at the barrier, shattering it and stopping the spears. Deidara glared at Kakuhiki as he stood in front of him with his own glare. "So you think you can beat my art?" Kakuhiki didn't reply, just continued to stare at Deidara. "I'm going to blow you off the face of the earth." Deidara made his bird fly higher, but it didn't move an inch. Deidara looked down and saw that a barrier had appeared on both of his legs and was attached to 3 trees. "I don't think you're going anywhere," Kakuhiki stated as he raised his burned arm towards Deidara. Suddenly, spear-like shapes appeared in front of Kakuhiki and were launched towards Deidara, forcing him to jump off his bird. But when the spears collided with the bird, they didn't penetrate it. The spears encased a small portion of the bird, and the rest was on the ground, pinning it down further. "I don't know why he dodged. It was just to make sure his bird didn't go anywhere." Deidara looked at his bird and then back at Kakuhiki. Deidara reached back into the pouches before pulling out 2 clay bombs that looked like dogs. "You'll regret desecrating my art." Deidara made a hand signal and the dog bombs charged towards Kakuhiki, who created a barrier separating himself from the bombs. But once the dogs hit the wall, they split into 4 each and surrounded the barrier. Kakuhiki looked at the dogs just as they began to glow. XXX. Kakashi jumped into the water while Sasuke jumped onto a rock with his Sharingan active. "What are you doing, Sasuke?" Kakashi asked as he slowly lifted his headband, revealing his Sharingan. But this brought an angry look to Sasuke's eyes. "The Sharingan is the symbol of an Uchiha." Sasuke snarled with rage with every word. "A lowly outsider like you has no right to display it." Sasuke's left arm erupted in lightning as he grabbed his sword and charged at Kakashi, who only charged with his Raikiri in his right hand. The 2 lightning attacks collided with each other, releasing a screech of metal grinding across the open area. Kakashi narrowed his eyes as Sasuke brought his katana up to slash at his right arm. Kakashi cut off the flow of chakra entering his Raikiri and dodged the blade inches from his shoulder blade. Kakashi spun around and delivered a swift kick to Sasuke's head, sending the young Uchiha spinning backward. Sasuke landed on his feet and continued to glare at Kakashi, who only glared back. "You still haven't answered my question." Kakashi growled as he continued to stare Sasuke down. Sasuke smiled as he closed his eyes. "I already told you no." Sasuke opened his eyes slightly, and Kakashi could see something moving in his pupil and knew what had happened. "I'm going to get revenge on Konoha." Sasuke's eyes opened and revealed a star-shaped pattern. But what surprised Kakashi was the fact that it had Itachi's Mangekyo pattern behind it. Sasuke saw the shocked look on Kakashi's face and smiled even wider. "Behold the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan." Kakashi dropped into a small stance ready for Sasuke to attack. XXX. Madara continued to smile under his mask as the small group of shinobi tried to come up with a plan. He made a small hand signal and the group of Kumo ninja waiting on the mountain leaped towards Madara and Zetsu from behind. Madara and Zetsu didn't even move an inch as black vines shot out of Zetsu's black side and wrapped around the Kumo ninja. Zetsu looked at the Kumo ninja as the vines wrapped around their necks before quickly snapping them. Now that's settled. Zetsu began to split until the white and black halves were completely separated. We can deal with them. The three looked at the group as they looked at each other with a mix of gazes. We have to fight, Gaara said as he took a step forward, his eyes showing no fear. If we don't, we won't be able to help Naruto or Karabi. Sand began to pour out of Gaara's gourd and cracks in the ground. He removed the Raiton seals from the walls before crushing them, allowing him to make his Raiton armor. Kankuro brought out his newest addition to his puppet collection, Sasori. Temari simply unfurled her fan while Hayashi got into a fighting stance with his Byakugan active. I guess they're not talking, Madara stated with a cheerful tone in his voice as he narrowed his Sharingan eye at the ninja. XXX. The explosion shook the ground as Kakuhiki was thrown into the sky, blood dripping from his mouth. Damn! I barely had time to make a barrier. Kakuhiki looked down to see 4 new dog bombs and sighed as he made a snake seal. I'll have to get rid of those pests. Kekaten, barrier release. The dogs quickly latched onto Kakuhiki, but that was when Kakuhiki was encased within a barrier. What do you think you're doing? Deidara laughed as the dogs began to glow. You just made my explosiveness even more dash. He stopped when he saw the smirk on Kakuhiki's lips. To wake Mono Cookin, Cheater's room. Kakuhiki finished as Deidara finally realized he was also trapped in a barrier. This is one of my favorite barriers because I can transport anything from one box to the other. Basically, I take whatever's in box A and put it in box B. You understand? Deidara saw that the dogs weren't in Kakuhiki's box, but the moment he looked down, all he saw was a blinding light. Kakuhiki's box slowly shattered, but Deidara's was ripped apart by his own bombs. Don't mess with me. Kakuhiki looked down to see he was falling, but he quickly created a barrier to catch himself. Kakuhiki looked up and watched as the smoke gently faded away, leaving nothing behind. Kakuhiki started to make his way back down to the ground when something caught his eye. Just as he looked down, a snake made of clay came straight for him, but just before it could strike, Kakuhiki expanded the barrier beneath him and covered him. Did you really think I'd be that stupid? Deidara asked as he walked out of the forest with the clay snake sticking out of his mouth. Now that I know what that jutsu does, I'll be extra careful to avoid it. Kakuhiki snarled just as the snake began wrapping around the box. Now die by my art. The snake exploded, breaking Kakuhiki's barrier with ease. But once the smoke cleared, Deidara saw nothing. I guess that goes double for you, came Kakuhiki's voice from behind Deidara. Not only can I transport foreign objects to another box, I can also transport myself. Deidara turned and looked at his opponent. I guess we're in for a wild ride. Despite the situation, Kakuhiki smiled at Deidara, which infuriated him even more. I'll kill you in a single instant. Deidara threw several spider bombs just as Kakuhiki erected a barrier in front of him and Deidara. The spider bombs exploded like a chain, with each explosion pushing Kakuhiki deeper into the forest. He's taking me somewhere, Kakuhiki thought just as they entered a clearing. It was then that he saw the giant shadow of what looked like a dragon made entirely of clay. Look at my shirt, Tsu Doragon, Dragon C2. Deidara exclaimed as he appeared above the dragon's head. My day just keeps getting better. Kakuhiki thought with a tired sigh as he created 3 new barriers. XXX. Kisame swung his sword downwards, but it was blocked by Guy's nunchaku. Guy gritted his teeth from the amount of force in the swing but managed to spin around and kick Kisame, sending him backward. Kisame looked at Guy with a smile filled with malice and emotion. Tell me, do you remember me now? Guy looked at him with confused eyes, which only served to infuriate Kisame further. Kisame threw his sword into the air as he snapped his hands together. Suetun. Bakusui Shoha. Water release. Explosive wave colliding with water. Kisame staggered forward just as he spat out a large amount of water, creating a giant tidal wave which Kisame jumped on top of. If you can't remember me, I'll make you remember. Kisame rode the wave as he began to head towards Guy, who jumped at Kisame, spinning his nunchaku until it became a blur of motion. Guy swung his weapon just as Kisame brought his sword down, connecting the separated water between the two, creating a small wall. Guy's eyes widened slightly, but quickly dropped when Kisame sneered at him. Sorry, I don't recognize you. Guy narrowed his eyes as he jumped back and applied some chakra to his feet to stand in the water. But I think I'd remember someone with such an unyouthful approach to life. Well, I'm not going to bother saying my name again. Kisame shouldered his sword and looked at Guy. But let me tell you this. You made a grave mistake by angering me. Kisame threw his sword into the air while making hand signs. Suetun, Suikoden no Jutsu, water release, water shark missile technique. Guy watched as the water in front of him swirled into a mini vortex until it shot upwards as the water took the shape of a giant shark. Guy just narrowed his eyes and stood his ground as the giant water shark came straight for him. Triple X. Kakashi dodged a lightning spear thrown by Sasuke. So he opened his Mangekyo. Kakashi thought as he landed on the ground and faced Sasuke while squeezing his right wrist. But I don't know what this eternal Mangekyo is all about. Sasuke charged another Raikiri just as Sasuke charged another Chidori. That's all you've got, Kakashi. Sasuke smirked at Kakashi as he smiled under his mask. Sasuke, you were never on Team 7 long enough to know me. Sasuke narrowed his eyes as Kakashi's Raikiri began to arc until lightning shot out of his dog-shaped hand. Raitun, Raryuken, lightning release, lightning hound. Sasuke narrowed his eyes at the dog as it charged at him. But just as it was about to launch itself, Sasuke swung his Chidori and collided with it. Sasuke readied his feet as he began to slide backward and added more chakra to his Chidori. The lightning dog vanished along with Sasuke's Chidori, leaving Sasuke with a slightly stronger hand. But when he looked at Kakashi, he wasn't there. Suddenly, Sasuke felt someone grab him by the ankles and roughly pull him underwater as Kakashi stood up. He must have sunk while I was taking care of his dog. Sasuke looked up as Kakashi twirled in the air and began making hand gestures. I'm sorry, Sasuke. I'll try to do this as quickly as possible, Kakashi announced with a sincere tone in his voice. Suetun, Suryuden no Jutsu, water release, water dragon bullet technique. Sasuke watched as the water above formed into a giant dragon with yellow eyes that seemed to snarl at him. The dragon surged forward, breaking the surface of the water, and headed straight for Sasuke. Sasuke narrowed his eyes as he went to perform the hand signs, but found both of his arms unable to move. He looked over and saw Kakashi on either side of him holding his arms up. Sasuke looked up just as the dragon opened its mouth and swallowed him, and then proceeded to crash to the bottom of the lake. Kakashi stood at the top of the lake waiting for any sign of movement, but seeing nothing he turned to leave when a giant ethereal hand tried to grab him. Kakashi jumped into his grasp and leaped back a few feet as the giant began to rise from the depths of the water. You think a pathetic guy like that will kill an Uchiha? Sasuke's voice also came as he emerged from the water. Well, then I think you need a good dose of reality. Kakashi's eyes narrowed as he looked at Sasuke. I never thought you had Susanoo. Sasuke's eyes widened at Kakashi's knowledge of Susanoo. How do you know Dashta? Sasuke stopped when he saw Kakashi's eye smile at him. I see. So you know more than you're letting on. Do you, Kakashi? I don't know what you mean. Kakashi stopped smiling and narrowed his eyes. I told you at the beginning that you weren't on Team 7 long enough to know me. Well, it doesn't matter because you're going to die here. Sasuke growled as his Susanoo began to grow armor and developed a crossbow on his left arm. And I'll kill you in a single instant. Susanoo raised his crossbow and leveled it at Kakashi as he fired. Kakashi's eyes widened at the speed the arrow traveled as his eye transformed into his Mangekyo. Sasuke smirked as water exploded from the impact of the arrow. Looks like you weren't that special. Sasuke turned to leave but stopped when he heard someone walking towards him. He turned to see Kakashi perfectly fine with his right eye closed. How did you survive? Sasuke shouted before noticing Kakashi's Sharingan transformation. I see you're surprised that a non-Uchiha like yourself can access the Mangekyo. There's a lot you don't know about me, Kakashi said, a hint of anger in his voice. I won't be able to dodge those arrows without Kamui. If I'm going to survive, I'll have to get rid of that Susanoo. Kakashi began making hand signs just as Sasuke fired another arrow. Triple X. Madara stood his ground as he easily passed through him. You're going to have to do a lot better than that, Madara declared as he turned to E with a smile hidden behind his mask. I'm sure you want to save your brother properly. This got the reaction Madara was hoping for as he charged at Madara with rage in his eyes. That's right. Come a little closer. He raised his fist to try and punch Madara in the face, but just before he could connect, he was swept away by a large amount of sand. What the hell are you doing? He yelled as he was pulled towards Gaara, who kept his arms crossed. He wants you to lose control, so you'll make a mistake. Gaara looked at as his sand began to slough off. We have to work together to take care of him, understand? He looked at Gaara, hatred still in her eyes, but nodded hesitantly. Kankuro, Temari. I want you to take care of the plant guy. Hey, we have a name, you know. The white Zetsu yelled as the black one patted him on the head. I'll help, Hayashi said as he stood next to Temari and Kankuro. All right, let's get this over with. Gaara looked back at Madara, who sat on a rock with his head resting on his hand. You want me to finish with everything ready? Gaara and he watched Madara's Sharingan flash in the light, sending a small shiver down both of their spines. But we've just begun. XXX. Kakuhiki erected a barrier in front of him just as another clay bomb was sent his way. He already knows we're on the same level, Kakuhiki thought as he narrowed his eyes at Deidara. So what's he planning? Deidara saw the look of concentration and felt the need to finish his jutsu faster. If he notices I'm onto something too, then it's over. Deidara pulled another lump of clay from his pouches, but instead of his hands eating it, he shoved the whole thing into his mouth. Kakuhiki's eyes widened and he brought his hands together, causing 4 new barriers to appear around them. Deidara spat out a large amount of clay that began to twist and form until Kakuhiki was looking at a giant clay replica of Deidara. What the hell are you awake to? Kakuhiki asked with narrowed eyes. This is the same jutsu I planned to use to kill Itachi Uchiha, Deidara announced with a note of pride as he soared above the giant bomb. But seeing as he's already dead, I suppose you'll be the first to test its power. Kakuhiki looked back at the Shimigame and clasped his hands. I can't allow you to detonate that bomb here, Kakuhiki announced as the Deidara bomb began to glow, but was quickly encased within a giant black and purple barrier. Kekaten, Shurji no Simon, barrier release. The 4 beasts gate. Kakuhiki watched as the bomb slowly dissipated, confusing Kakuhiki. Was it a failure? Kakuhiki was about to release his barrier when he felt a smile break out on his face. I see microscopic bombs. Deidara looked at Kakuhiki as he smiled at him. How did you know? Well, all of my barriers are still bound to me by a small amount of chakra. Kakuhiki smiled at this. Prove that no matter how small the object is, as long as it has chakra and is within one of my barriers, I can sense it. Kakuhiki separated his hands, but kept their thumbs touching. Kekaten, Kyobushi no Kekai, barrier release. Barrier of the Mad Swordsman. The barrier then began to break apart as if it were being cut by a sword. What are you doing? Deidara watched until the giant barrier shrank to 10 small barriers. I've contained all their bombs within these small barriers. Kakuhiki spread his arms, and 5 barriers followed each arm until they were right over the ocean. And now to get rid of them. Kakuhiki lowered his arms, and the barriers disappeared beneath the waves. By now, I'd say they were at the bottom of the ocean, but that's just a guess. You have desecrated my art. Deidara was now shaking with anger. I will make you suffer for this. Deidara reached out and grabbed his Akatsuki robes and ripped it off, revealing a body of kanji writing that led to a circle that had stitches in it. Deidara ripped off the stitches to reveal a mouth with sharp teeth and a long tongue. I will rip you to shreds. Deidara took the last piece of clay and shoved it into his giant mouth. Suddenly, Deidara's body was beginning to fade away as black lines began to lead to a small black sphere on Deidara's chest. Kakuhiki growled, but turned his head just in time to see Kabuto, Sai, and Haku returning with Hinata safe. What the hell is he doing? Haku exclaimed as Deidara started to glow a little. It's a suicide bomb. Kabuto grunted as he looked around. We won't be able to escape the 10-kilometer blast radius. Hinata then moved slowly as he raised his head and looked at Kakuhiki, who smiled back. Hinata, give this to Naruto. Kakuhiki threw a headband to Hinata, but Sai caught it and handed the headband to Hinata. I won't make a return trip. Kakuhiki turned his back and looked at Deidara, his breathing quickening. What the hell do you mean? Haku looked at Sai, who had already started making a bird come out of his scroll. He'll contain the blast, but the result will kill him, Kabuto stated emotionlessly as he approached the bird with Hinata on his back. If his Kekaten had a weakness, it would be that it consumes more chakra than necessary. Even if he could defeat Deidara, he'd most likely die from chakra depletion. We can't dash. Haku was interrupted by Kakahiki, who clasped his hands together. Haku, go! Haku looked up and saw Kakahiki give him a small smile. I don't need you to die an unnecessary death. So go and keep Naruto out of trouble. Haku gave Kakahiki a small nod as he climbed onto the bird and they flew away. Now, where were we? Deidara was about to explode and Kakahiki could see it. Now I remember. Kekaten. Daimao no Kyuden. Barrier release. Great Demon King's Palace. The entire sky Kakahiki and Deidara were standing in was suddenly covered in a translucent black barrier. This is my ultimate barrier. It absorbs chakra from anything growing stronger as it does so. Deidara's eyes widened as he felt his bomb explode. Kakahiki closed his eyes as the blast slowly closed in on him. Guess I can finally get some proper sleep. XXX. Kabuto, Sai, Haku, and Hinata looked back when they saw a flash of light and knew Kakahiki was finally dead. I promised to give this to Naruto, Hinata thought as she looked back at Kumo. Kakashi ducked just as another arrow was fired, missing him by inches as he threw a kunai that had an explosive tag on it. The tag exploded upon contact with the Susanoo, but once the smoke cleared, Kakashi saw a grinning Sasuke. Did you think that would be enough to beat Susanoo? Sasuke asked, a mocking tone in his voice. No, but this should. Kakashi focused his Mangekyo on Sasuke, who looked at him in confusion until he saw the center of Susanoo begin to be pulled into a vortex. This is like Madara's teleportation jutsu, Sasuke thought urgently as he jumped along with Susanoo to avoid Kamui. Kakashi canceled his jutsu as he jumped behind Sasuke, who laughed as Susanoo aimed his crossbow at him. Kakashi's eyes widened as the crossbow fired and the arrow pierced Kakashi's chest. Sasuke laughed in glee as Kakashi's body fell into the water, but as soon as it hit the water it vanished in a puff of smoke. Kage Bunshin. Sasuke turned around and found Kakashi standing right behind him. Sasuke turned around, but his Susanoo didn't follow suit. He took a good look at Susanoo and found chains wrapped around him, pinning one of his arms to his sides. Sasuke followed the chains and found that they were attached to several rocks around the area. The chains are reinforced with chakra, Kakashi announced, earning a glare as Sasuke's Susanoo began to disappear. So you're going to fight without Susanoo's help? I could reactivate it and then crush you, Sasuke said with a smile that matched a demon's. But I want to hear your screams of agony as I slowly kill you. Sasuke closed his right eye and kept his left open. Tsukuyami, Kakashi thought as he closed his normal eye and kept his Sharingan in Mangekyo. Sasuke just smiled as he focused on his left eye, making Kakashi feel a sense of dread. Kakashi jumped just as a wave of black fire rose up above the spot he was standing on not a second ago. Amaterasu, Sasuke smiled as he looked at Kakashi with his Sharingan. Yes, Kakashi. Sasuke smiled as the black fire seemed to surround Sasuke, protecting him. My brother was the best at using Tsukuyami, but I can use Amaterasu to the best of my ability. These are my flames of hatred, and I will use them to burn Konoha to ash. Suddenly, the fire rushed towards Kakashi at an alarming speed, making him hide under the raging inferno. But as soon as Sasuke smiled, Kakashi knew he wasn't out of danger yet. He turned his head to see the Amaterasu heading towards him again, forcing him to dodge once more. Kakashi dashed through the water as the black flames attacked him, following his every move. Sasuke raised his hands in a tiger seal as a cruel smile played on his lips. Enten. Goku no Ryu, Blaze Release, Hellfire Dragon. Kakashi watched as Amaterasu stopped following him and instead rose into the sky as it began to take form. Kakashi watched with growing despair as it began to form into a dragon with piercing red eyes. This is the object of your death, Kakashi. The dragon let out a roar and lunged at Kakashi, deadly intent evident in its red eyes. Triple X. Naruto felt his body being pushed back as an invisible force shoved him against a wall. You can't touch my pain, Pain announced as he lowered his hand. Why don't you just give up? Naruto's eyes flashed red as he stood up, anger in his gaze. Because Jiraiya wouldn't have given up. Naruto stated with hatred in his words. You think I don't know pain? Then you're surely mistaken. Naruto vanished in a puff of smoke as the real Naruto appeared behind him. And I'll prove it with a single attack. Naruto created a Rasengan and jammed it into the animal path's head and sent it spinning away from Naruto. Naruto went to attack the Deva path only for Azura to blast him with a beam of chakra. Naruto felt blood rush to his mouth but smiled anyway as Karabi burst out of the sky in his demon cloak. The Azura looked up just in time to be crushed by Karabi's foot, causing Pain to narrow his eyes. Now what? Karabi asked with a satisfied smile. What do you have up your sleeve? Pain shook his head at Karabi as he raised both hands, causing rocks and boulders to begin rising into the air. Naruto and Karabi looked up as the sky was blocked out by the large number of rocks in the sky. How is this a trick? Pain released his jutsu as he swung his arms downwards, causing rocks to fall at alarming speeds. Naruto and Karabi jumped in opposite directions to avoid the falling rocks, but just as Naruto jumped over a rock, the Preta path appeared in front of him, grabbing him by the neck and forcing him against the ground. Naruto was about to create a Rasengan when he felt his chakra begin to disappear. This thing sucks chakra, Naruto thought as he began to weaken more and more until a lightning bolt tore a hole through the Preta, allowing Naruto to take it out. Naruto stood up as he grabbed a nearby rock to support him as Karabi entered. Are you okay? Karabi watched as Naruto nodded, but only to push Karabi out of the way of a giant rhino. That can't be. Naruto turned around and saw that the animal path was still standing with no visible wounds on it. I destroyed that thing. How is it back? Naruto saw movement to his left only to see Naraku path standing next to a newly healed Preta path. You cannot defeat God, Pain announced as the paths reunited once more. This is the end of you, Jinchuriki. With that, all the paths leaped toward Karabi and Naruto with a black sword in their hands. Triple X. Kisame stumbled back as Guy kicked him in the chest. Guy spun around and landed on the ground. Guy was covered in cuts from his encounter with Kisame's sword, but he was still standing, which surprised Kisame to some extent. You certainly are a tough bastard. Kisame smirked as Guy smirked back. That is the power of youth. Guy crossed his arms as he began channeling more chakra into his body. Allow me to show you the full power of the spring of youth. Kisame watched as the ground around Guy's feet began to crack. Guy's body began to turn a deep red as he continued to press forward, creating a series of shockwaves that shook the ground. Impossible! Kisame growled as he watched a wave of chakra envelop Guy. This man is unleashing the Hashiman 8 gates through sheer force. He truly is a beast. Kaiaman, Gate of Wonders, open! Guy shouted as a burst of chakra tore through the ground around him. Now is the time for youth. Kisame looked at his sword and saw that it was shaking uncontrollably, making Kisame smile. I've never seen Samahata this excited before. Kisame smiled as Guy looked on with no emotion on his face. Kisame charged, but just as he took 3 steps, Guy disappeared. Kisame stopped in his tracks just as he was kicked in the back of the head. Kisame was sent headfirst into a wall when Guy grabbed him by the leg and swung him backward. He's faster than before, Kisame thought as blood began to drip from his mouth. Kisame looked up at the sky just in time to see Guy fall and slam into the ground below him. Guy stared at the crater with dull eyes as he waited for Kisame to reappear, but instead of Kisame, a giant column of water gushed out, forcing Guy back as the water continued to gush out. Guy watched as the water spread out until it reached the other side of the rock face. Guy looked around as a dark figure emerged from the water. What the hell? Guy looked at Kisame as Samahata seemed to be fused with him as it spread throughout his body. I never showed you this, but I have my own ace up my sleeve, Kisame announced as the water began to rise faster. I can fuse with Samahata to become a true monster. Kisame smiled as he felt his body transform and watched Guy take a fighting stance. Triple X. Madara allowed another barrage of sand-shaped shuriken to pass through him as E appeared behind him. You're really going to attack like that again and again? Madara declared in a tired voice as he let out a scream of fury and went to punch Madara in the face, but simply passed right through. Madara grabbed E by his ankle just as he cleared his body and threw him into a nearby mountain with relative ease. But just as Madara let go of E's ankle, Gaara struck. Madara suddenly found himself dodging several sand spikes that shot out of the ground, but he managed to make a single sign and allowed the spikes to pass through him. I see that, Gaara said with a small smile. You have to release your jutsu in order to grab us, but before you can reuse it, you must make a hand gesture. That's our opening, and I plan to use it to our advantage. Madara narrowed his eyes at Gaara as he stepped out of the spikes. Very well, Gaara, but that still won't save you from me. Madara leaped off the rock he was standing on as he headed straight for Gaara, but he chose that exact moment to throw a giant boulder towards Madara, forcing him to focus his attention on the boulder. Madara allowed the boulder to pass through him, but when he turned back to Gaara, the Kazekage wasn't there. You're starting to piss me off, Madara growled as a whirlpool of sand appeared next to E. The Raikage is attacking at close range while the Kazekage is attacking with his sand to make sure it doesn't grab E. I have to break this up or I'll run out of chakra. Madara then charged towards the duo with an evil glint in his eyes, but unbeknownst to the three men, a dark figure appeared on the rocky terrain right above them. Triple X. Hayashi leaped over a wave of black vines that led them to the Black Zetsu. Hayashi glanced at Kankuro and Temari and saw that they were trying to keep the white Zetsu down to a manageable number. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up. Hayashi looked at Black Zetsu as it raised its single arm before hitting the ground. Hayashi saw the chakra vines travel underground and jumped just as they erupted beneath him. But before he could get any further, a vine wrapped around his ankle before slamming him into the ground. My other self isn't combat-based like I am. Hayashi narrowed one of his eyes as he felt his chakra draining. But we still share the ability to drain our opponent's chakra. You're facing the wrong opponent, Hyuga, but I suppose it can be expected that you haven't been born yet. This confused Hayashi as the Black Zetsu looked at him. I suppose it's time dash. It never ended when a large lion made of ink attacked him with force. Hayashi stood up when he felt the vine break and looked at Sai and Hinata standing in front of him. We're here to help, Sai announced as Hinata turned and gave her father a hug. Sai unraveled another scroll and drew 2 pictures on the scroll with ease. Now the real fight begins. Sai raised his hand in a one-handed ram seal. Hinata, Hayashi, and Black Zetsu saw 2 Neo, benevolent kings, each on either side of Sai. Don't worry about E, Gaara, and Kakashi. We sent help to them, but we couldn't get close to where Naruto is fighting. What about the other 2? Hayashi asked as he stood up with his daughter wrapped in his one arm. We checked them out, and they're fine, Sai announced with certainty. We sent the rest of our group to help those who needed the most help. Hayashi nodded as Sai's Neo charged at the Black Zetsu. Triple X. Kakashi was trying to stand, but quickly fell back down as he looked at his burned left leg. I told you. Kakashi looked at Sasuke as his black flames began to transform into a dragon once more. This is the end of you. Sasuke narrowed his eyes as his dragon moved forward to end Kakashi's life. But before the dragon got within 4 feet, a giant wall of ice appeared between it. I'm afraid I can't allow that. Sasuke's eyes widened as Haku appeared and grabbed Kakashi just as the dragon melted through the ice. Haku dodged to the left just as he created an ice ramp and began to slide on it to escape the dragon. Sasuke narrowed his eyes as his dragon returned to him, surrounding him in a black inferno. Haku left Kakashi on the opposite side of the shore. Just rest now, Kakashi-san. I'll take it from here. Haku gave a small bow as he jumped into the water, causing it to freeze in a circle around him. So another ant to be crushed by my power. Sasuke mocked Haku as Haku glared at him with hatred in his eyes. The last time we fought, I almost killed you, Haku announced in a firm voice. Today, I will correct that mistake and kill you. Haku clasped his hands as cold air began to escape from him. Hayaton. Raito, ice release, deep freeze. Haku whispered this as the circle of ice expanded to cover the entire ice lake. This is your Uchiha graveyard, XXX. Kisame took a hard punch as he spun around in the water and slammed his tail into Guy, knocking them away from each other. At this rate, we won't be finishing this fight for a while, Kisame announced with a grin on his shark-like face. How about we end this in one last attack? We hold nothing back, throw our strongest jutsu at each other, and see who's the strongest. What do you say? Guy never responded with words, simply clasping his hands together, making Kisame smile. Kisame removed Samahata from his hands to allow him to form the appropriate hand signs. The two clashed while building their chakra levels until they gathered enough. Suetun. Daikoden no Jutsu. Great Shark Missile Technique. Kisame roared as a giant shark formed out of the water and charged at Guy. Hiradora. Daytime Tiger. Guy was surrounded by a tiger head that charged at the shark, each roaring at the other in challenge. Kisame smirked as he watched the two jutsu clash. Fool, this isn't an ordinary Suetun. Kisame watched as the Hiradora began to shrink. It absorbs the chakra of whatever it hits, growing in size and strength. You can't win. Kisame was then surprised when his shark didn't grow in size, but instead rippled as if blown by the wind. What's going on? Roar, young one! Guy shouted, and that was when Kisame saw the tiger's head appear right in front of him. Kisame's eyes widened as the tiger let out a roar and released a shocking explosion that leveled everything in the surroundings. As the massive explosion passed, Kisame was lying on his back as he stared at Samahata, who was split in two from the force of keeping his master safe. Guy appeared in front of him as he swung his arm back for the finishing blow. I want to know one last thing. Kisame smiled at Guy, a wild look in his eyes. What was that jutsu? Hiradora isn't ninjutsu, it's taijutsu. Guy explained simply as he continued to glare at Kisame. It's a single punch faster than any other that builds up air pressure in a single point before releasing it all in an explosion. No wonder my jutsu didn't absorb it. Kisame threw his head back as he looked up at the sky. You want to know the reason why I joined Akatsuki? It was to see a world of truths, not lies my entire life. I've lived nothing but a lie. I wanted to see a world where lies didn't exist. That's why I joined Akatsuki. Kisame looked at Guy, and for the first time Guy looked at Kisame with some pity in his eyes. I can't let you live, Guy declared as he added more chakra into his fist. But I will say this. You lived and died as a true shinobi, and for that I will never forget you, Kisame Hashigaki. Kisame's eyes widened at that, just as Guy slammed his fist into his chest, causing the ground to shake in a thunderous thud. XXX. Gaara ducked just as E was thrown over his head. But when he looked up he saw Madara looking right at him. Gotch dashta. Madara never finished as a coffin erupted from the ground and slammed into his chest. Madara rolled on the ground as he came to a stop at the bottom of the cliff. He looked back to see Kabuto with his hand resting on the coffin with a poisonous smile on his face. Hello again, Madara, Kabuto said as he continued to glare at Madara. Don't get up on my own. I'm not here to fight you. Gaara and E got into a fighting stance ready to fight Kabuto, but Kabuto simply punched the coffin, causing the lid to fall off. But he, on the other hand, is more than ready to fight you. Madara's single eye narrowed as he realized the jutsu he was looking at. Edo Tensei. Madara growled as he looked at Orochimaru's form. How? At this, Kabuto smiled even wider. Simple, really? Kabuto displayed his right arm, covered in scales that gleamed in the sunlight. One of the drawbacks of Edo Tensei is that it requires the DNA of the one you wish to resurrect. But if you recall, I fused with Orochimaru's DNA. So, somehow I can bring him back again and again. Orochimaru looked around until he saw Madara and Kabuto. I see my dear Kabuto has mastered Edo Tensei. Orochimaru, for one reason or another, smiled at this. He definitely knew talent. It was then that he turned to Madara with a wild glint in his eyes. So you summoned me from the dead to fight this man? Yes, Orochimaru. Kabuto slid a kunai into Orochimaru's head. I won't suppress your personality, but I'm afraid I can't let you run free. You may do whatever you want, but only with Madara. Orochimaru glanced slightly at Kabuto, who only smiled back. You really are a creepy kid. Kabuto smirked as Madara charged at him with his unique Sharingan spinning madly, but just as it was about to reach Kabuto, he dodged just as a sword sliced through the air he was standing in. Sorry, but I believe we have some unfinished business. Madara looked at Orochimaru as he raised his Kisangani in a ready position. I'm going to enjoy this. Orochimaru stated clearly as he licked his lips. Triple X. Black Zetsu and White Zetsu collided with each other after being attacked. Guess you're doing as well as I am. White Zetsu said with a chuckle. Shut up. Black Zetsu said with annoyance in his voice. We have enough problems to deal with. The two Zetsu glared at their opponents as they formed a circle around them. This is getting annoying. We're not meant to fight in such a large crowd. Have you finished releasing the spores yet? This brought surprised looks from everyone as they saw White Zetsu smirk. Yes. As soon as those words left his mouth, the entire group began to have copies of White Zetsu begin to grow on them. Hinata and Sai looked at Hayashi, Kankuro, and Temari struggled to break free. Guess you were a little late. Hinata thought she heard a tone of disappointment in Zetsu's voice as the two merged back into one. There's no need for us to stay, because I expect you're going to have a lot of time on your hands. The meaning of that sentence became clear as White Zetsu began to sprout from the ground. Hinata, run. Hayashi growled as his Byakugan deactivated due to lack of chakra. No, Hinata said as she dropped into her fighting stance. I won't leave my friends or family behind. I will fight until the day I die. Hayashi looked down at his daughter, smiling gently as Sai summoned two more Neo. Take those things off them and quickly, Sai ordered, and the two Neo got to work eliminating the Zetsu spore, but the remaining two Neo stayed with Hinata and Sai. We have to fight together or we'll be like them. Hinata nodded and began pumping chakra into her palms until they began to glow and form lion heads. Let's finish this and go find Naruto. Hinata said with determination as she charged at the White Zetsu group with Sai and the Neo behind her. Triple X. Sasuke dodged another wave of ice that shot up into the sky as Haku continued sliding down a ramp made of ice. You puny little worm. Sasuke yelled as he wished for Amaterasu to form a wall of fire around him. I'll melt you into a puddle. Sasuke charged, leaving a hole behind, but he never noticed the hole closing. Haku jumped off the ramp and looked at Sasuke with a small glare. I'm afraid it's too late. Sasuke willed Amaterasu into a fist and sent it charging at Haku. Kakashi watched as Haku didn't move an inch, but that's when he saw it. Snow. Kakashi looked up at the sky and saw grayish-black clouds with snow falling from them. Kakashi turned his attention back to Haku as a giant wall of ice blocked the fist, surprising Sasuke. The moment you let me chill the atmosphere, you've lost the fight. What are you babbling about? Sasuke growled as the Amaterasu retreated, leaving a dent in the block of ice. Those ice attacks weren't aimed at you, Haku stated in a cold voice. They were meant to chill the atmosphere around us. I told you this was your Uchiha graveyard. Now you can see why that is. Haku looked up at the sky, and Sasuke followed her eyes and saw the snow falling. All ice is my weapon, even snow falls into that category. I may not be strong without water, snow, or ice, but the moment you let me chill the atmosphere, you've sealed your fate, Sasuke. Haku clasped his hands in a bird seal. Hayatan. Hyoga no Yoroi, ice release, glacier armor. The snow suddenly shifted and began to surround Haku in a blizzard as Sasuke looked on, frowning. When the snow cleared, Haku was covered in what appeared to be samurai armor made entirely of ice. Haku glared at Sasuke as he took a step forward, freezing the ice even further. This is the result of training for days to protect Naruto and his village. I'll make sure you're frozen until the end of time. Haku spread his legs and moved his arm, creating another layer of ice that he jumped onto. You think I'm afraid of this little ice show? Sasuke chuckled as he glared at Haku with anger in his eyes. I'm going to show you the power of Amaterasu. Haku continued sliding down the ramp as the black flames came straight for him, but he didn't change course as the flames consumed him. Sasuke narrowed his eyes at the burning mass, but not until a voice caught his attention. Looking for me. Sasuke turned just in time to see Haku stab him with a sword made of ice. Blood splattered onto the ice, but Sasuke managed to twist his body and grab the blood, allowing it to run down his palm. "I forgot about that little trick," Sasuke said through gritted teeth as Haku smiled at him. "You mean my Hayatan, Makio Hyosho? Ice release, demonic ice crystal mirrors." Haku smiled at Sasuke's narrowed eyes. "This is a much more powerful version. First I create an ice circle, then I chill the atmosphere, and finally I create the armor. In short, I can travel anywhere within this circle as long as that armor is on me." Sasuke watched as Haku was encased in that ice armor once again, still wearing his smile. "You can't trap me, Uchiha. Your fire can melt my ice, but it will regenerate thanks to the temperature." "I see." Sasuke jumped back just as Haku's sword broke. "The only solution is to heat things up." Amaterasu suddenly arced into the sky, but before it could reach the cloud layer, an ice dome appeared in front of it. The dome fell from the sky and sealed both Haku and Sasuke in the ice arena. "I told you," Haku announced, his voice filled with determination. "You missed the moment you allowed me to chill the atmosphere." Sasuke snarled as Haku took a step forward with deadly intent behind every step. "Hayatan, Sabuzuro no Hoko, ice release, Sub-Zero spear." Haku thrust his hand out as a thin stream of ice shot up to roughly his height and began to transform until he held a spear with a large curved point at the end. "Now is the beginning of the end for you, Sasuke." Sasuke just glared as Haku raised the spear and pointed it at him. Madara dodged a giant wave of snakes as Orochimaru charged at him with his sword ready. Madara allowed Orochimaru to phase through him, but the moment he turned and reached out to pull him into his dimension, he saw the wave of sand heading straight for him. Madara decided to let the attack phase through him once more as he allowed himself to fall towards the ground looking at Kabuto, Gaara, and Orochimaru. "This is getting bad." Madara narrowed his eyes at the group. "I'm nearing my time limit. I can't keep this up for much longer." Madara let out a small sigh knowing what he should do. He raised his hand and placed it right where his covered eye was. Gaara didn't allow Madara to finish what he was planning as he sent a wave of sand towards him. Madara jumped out of the way just as Orochimaru appeared next to him swinging his sword at his head. Madara spun his body around just as Orochimaru's sword cut through his mask, causing the pieces to begin to break. Why isn't he letting the attacks pass through him? Gaara thought as he looked at Madara in confusion as he disappeared in a burst of lightning. Unless it was a dashta. It was then that Gaara realized what Madara was doing and watched as he reappeared behind Madara with his fist raised. "Stop Raikage." Gaara was too late as Madara broke the last piece of his mask and revealed his other Sharingan just as I's fist tore a hole through Madara's chest. I narrowed his eyes at Madara's weakening body, but that's when a laugh drew his attention back. "Fool." I felt the sword pierce through his chest, surprising I as it pierced through his Raiton armor. He looked over at Madara only to see his right Sharingan begin to close as he fell from the air. "But I have to admit, I never thought I would have had to resort to using the Izanagi, god of creation. Now, who's next to lie bleeding beneath Madara Uchiha?" But before anyone could respond, a form began to emerge next to Madara. "Sorry to interrupt, but we have to go," Zetsu announced, capturing Madara's full attention. "Oh, then it's over." Zetsu simply nodded. "Yes, but we've lost Kisame." This brought a tinge of anger to Madara as he looked at the group. "Kisame's death is regrettable," Madara said with anger in his voice. "But it can't be helped. We'll go collect the rest of the Akatsuki along with our prizes." Madara glared at Gaara with a glint in his Sharingan. "Until next time, the Kazekage." Madara suddenly began to pull himself into his dimension just as Zetsu sank into the ground. Gaara was about to give chase when he remembered I. The small group ran towards him as Kabuto finished his jutsu, causing Orochimaru's body to be encased in the coffin once more. "Move out of the way," Kabuto growled as he roughly shoved Gaara out of his way to get to I. "The wound is deep, but if we get 2 other medics here, he'll be fine." Gaara looked at Kabuto with astonishment in his eyes. "Don't you have the idea in your head that I'm doing this to be a good boy? Naruto helped me regain control of my body again. I'm just returning the favor by keeping this man alive until you get some more medics here. Gaara nodded as he created a Sunabunshin, sand clone, but stayed to watch Kabuto as his clone headed towards Kumo for help. XXX. Hinata avoided another white Zetsu as she slammed her chakra-infused palm down on its head. Just as the Zetsu's body fell, another leaped forward to resume the attack. Hinata looked at Sai and realized he wasn't looking any better as his ink creatures began to swarm. We need to do something, and fast. Hinata looked at the Zetsu charging at her as a giant tornado tore through them. Hinata turned just as Temari landed next to her along with Hayashi. We're going to beat them, Temari announced proudly as she moved her fan to fire more Zetsu. Hinata turned to see Kankuro helping Sai use his 3 puppets. I don't want you to leave my side. Do you understand? Hinata looked at her father, who looked at the approaching Zetsu clones. Yes, Hinata said with a smile as she got into a fighting stance, but just as they were about to charge, a beam shot through the Zetsu, taking out most of them. They turned to see a small group of Kumo ninja staring at them. Omoi, go help the puppet user. Omoi nodded and jumped towards the Zetsu just as it brought down its electrically charged sword. Karui, go help the others. I'll try to locate Karabi. The other girl nodded and jumped just as Samui disappeared in a display of speed. Hinata looked at Karui just as she landed, causing the Kumo girl to look up at her. What? Karui yelled as she sliced a Zetsu in 2. Why are you helping us? Hinata asked as she slammed her palm against another Zetsu. Because the Reikage told us so too, Karui said. He's currently being treated by a medic Nin, and right when we showed up he told us to help you find Karabi and Naruto. Hinata nodded and charged at Hayashi and Karui right next to him. XXX. Sasuke squeezed his eye as a surge of pain shot through him. I'll kill you. Sasuke snarled as Haku stood in front of him in ice armor, sword in hand. I'm afraid that won't happen, Sasuke, Haku stated in a calm, precise voice. Because your death is here. Haku dropped his sword as he clapped his hands together. Hayatan. Hyoki no Ryujin, dragon god of the Ice Age. Suddenly, the ice surrounding the 2 fighters began to break apart and gather in front of Haku. Sasuke and Kakashi watched as a giant dragon composed of nothing but ice appeared in front of them. Kakashi narrowed his Sharingan eye at the dragon as he watched a thin beam of chakra cling to Haku's body. What is this? You think this scares me? Sasuke yelled as he opened his left eye, shooting the black flames towards Haku's dragon. I'll melt it into nothing. Haku smirked as his dragon reared its head back and spun it forward, releasing a roar that created a glacier in front of him. The Amaterasu slammed into the ice and began to melt the ice, but that's when Haku jumped on his dragon's back and took to the sky. Haku clasped his hands once more as his dragon looked at Sasuke and opened its mouth. Sasuke quickly formed a wall with his Amaterasu just as the dragon fired giant ice spikes at Sasuke. Time to end this. Sasuke looked towards the voice and saw Haku above him with the dragon falling towards him as the ice began to fall. Sasuke formed an Amaterasu shield right above him as the dragon picked up speed and fell faster. The fool! Sasuke smirked at the dragon as Haku leaped down. Nothing can survive Amaterasu. Sasuke watched as the dragon crashed into the black flames and began to melt. But that's when he looked at Haku, who had her hands clasped together in a ram seal. Righto! Deep freeze. Sasuke's eyes widened as the dragon exploded with enough force to send Amaterasu flying. Sasuke looked around as ice began to cover the area he was standing in. But just as he was about to run, the ice shot towards a pillar. Goodbye, Sasuke. But just as Haku looked at the pillar, she saw that Sasuke was gone. You almost had it, Haku Yuki. Snow. Haku turned his head in time to see Madara holding a Sasuke fighter. Let me go! Sasuke yelled as he tried to reach Haku. I still need to kill them. Madara quickly threw Sasuke to the ground and stomped on his back. No! Madara said before the glared Sasuke. We held back long enough for Nagato. Now we must go and assist with the Jinchuriki extraction. Madara waited until Sasuke calmed down and then allowed the Uchiha to stand. Madara looked at Haku and Kakashi as they looked at the 2 Uchiha. We will meet again. With that, Madara wrapped himself and Sasuke away, leaving Haku and Kakashi behind. We need to get to Naruto's location. Kakashi turned to see Haku kneeling, trying to catch his breath. Haku, are you okay? I'll be fine, go and make sure Naruto is safe. Haku said with a slight smile as Kakashi nodded and disappeared. Please, it's okay, Naruto. XXX, surrender. Pain said as he looked at the Jinchuriki struggling to stand. I told you we chose to attack when you were at your weakest. You can't overcome my pain. Though I must admit I was surprised when you destroyed 2 of my bodies. Naruto simply stared at Pain as he stood up and glared at him. Karabi stood up as well and glared at Naruto. He's almost out of chakra, Hachibi stated with a tone of concern in his voice. I know if this keeps up, he'll end up dying, Karabi replied. Naruto looked at his trembling hand and gritted his teeth. I can't lose now. Naruto clapped his hands together as he summoned the Kyuubi's chakra. I won't lose. Naruto disappeared in a burst of light, but Pain simply shook his head. You can't defeat God. Pain raised his right hand. Shinra Tensei, heavenly subjugation of the omnipresent God. Naruto appeared right in front of Pain, his fist only a centimeter away from being blown away. Naruto punched the ground hard enough to create a small pool as blood dripped from his mouth. This is getting worse with the second Karabi, Hachibi said. The boy is losing too much of his chakra. At this rate, he'll die. Karabi gritted his teeth and looked at Pain just as Madara, Sasuke, and Zetsu appeared. Having fun, Nagato? Madara asked as he watched the remaining members of the 6 Paths of Pain join him. I see you lost 2 of your bodies. Pain simply looked at Madara and then back at the Jinchuriki. They're finished. Pain said emotionlessly as the Kyuubi's chakra faded from Naruto. The boy has nothing left. Karabi looked at Naruto as he tried to stand up but fell back down. I can't let this happen. Karabi stood in front of Naruto, shocking everyone. If you want the boy, you have to go through me. Karabi said this as he began to cover himself in his demon's chakra. Karabi turned his head towards Naruto and looked at him in confusion. You have a fire inside you that will never go out. Do me a favor. Tell my brother to keep rolling. Before Naruto could say another word, Karabi pushed Naruto off the side of the cliff they were on, causing Naruto to plummet into the river below. Now let's rock. Karabi's skin began to tear as tentacles began to sprout from his body. XXX. Kakashi met up with Samui when a giant explosion caught their attention and they ran towards her. They arrived and saw nothing but a giant crater and figures disappearing into the distance. Kakashi scanned the area and saw someone across the river at the bottom of the cliff. Kakashi and Samui jumped to get to the individual, but before they saw the person's face, they knew exactly who it was. Naruto, are you okay? Kakashi yelled as he landed next to the blonde Jinchuriki. Where's Karabi? Samui asked as Naruto moved. He pushed me. Naruto choked out. He said to tell his brother to keep rolling. Naruto struggled to stand, but fell only to be caught by Kakashi. You need to inform your Raikage and tell him what happened. Kakashi told Samui, who continued to stare at the top of the cliff. There's nothing we can do right now. Samui looked at Kakashi and nodded before disappearing with Kakashi. XXX. Pain looked at Madara as they traveled toward aim with Karabi. Why didn't we go after the Kyuubi? Pain asked, his eyes narrowed. Because we didn't have enough time, Madara stated in an honest voice. Besides, 2 more people were heading our way, and who knows how much longer until another group chased them. Pain stared at Madara for a few more seconds before turning his head. Besides, I still need you for a few more days, Nagato. I need to gather another component for this plan. Madara glanced at Pain behind him. I need to go get something. Pain looked at Madara with a questioning look in his eyes. What's so important that you can't help with the Hachibi's extraction? Pain asked, earning a small glare from Madara. You already have plenty of help with the extraction, Madara said, gesturing to the 6 Paths of Pain, Zetsu, and Sasuke. Besides, without this, we can't extract the Kyuubi from Naruto until we have it. May I ask where this item is? Pain watched as Madara's single eye turned upwards with a cruel glint in it. Konoha was the only word Madara said as they walked deeper into the forest. Triple X. Kumogakure was in an uproar not only from being tricked into attacking an innocent man, but also from Karabi's kidnapping. The Raikage was in bad shape, but insisted on going to find Karabi. "I will destroy Akatsuki with my own hands," he shouted as he stood up, but soon fell back down. Naruto looked around at the chaos, but not until he was grabbed from behind. "Naruto!" Hinata screamed as she buried her face in Naruto's back. Naruto turned around and gave Hinata the biggest hug he could. "I thought I'd never see you again. Well, I'm here." Naruto kissed Hinata on the top of her head as he let out a cough. "Uzumaki." Naruto turned and stared at E without blinking. "I'm not very good at admitting I was wrong, but save it, Raikage," Naruto said, interrupting E. "We have bigger problems to deal with." He looked at Naruto and nodded as he stood up. "We need to gather our sources and go find Karabi," he shouted, getting everyone's attention. "I'm calling a Kage meeting in 3 days." He looked around at everyone before settling on the Konoha group. "Tell your Hokage about the meeting." Hayashi was about to charge at E with anger in his eyes when Naruto's outstretched arm. "This is not the time for that, Hayashi-sama." Naruto looked Hayashi straight in the eyes. "We need to work together to defeat Akatsuki. We can't fight each other." Hayashi looked at E as he turned around, with Naruto and Hinata right behind him. "We'll see you in 3 days," Naruto announced as the group disappeared in a swirl of leaves. E looked at Naruto's spot as a small smile spread across his mouth. "Naruto Uzumaki." He looked up at the sky as he walked towards his office to get ready for the meeting. Triple X. "Hey Naruto, don't you have to go to the Hokage meeting?" Kakashi looked behind him as everyone looked at Naruto. "Yes, I'll have to," Naruto said in a tired voice. "I have to get to Uzushiogakure and report to them." Naruto stopped along with Kabuto, Haku, and Yukaken, causing everyone to stop. Kakashi looked at the grinning Kabuto with a grimace. "Naruto, how can you trust him?" Kakashi asked, gesturing to Kabuto, who only smiled even wider. "He's proven himself trustworthy so far," Naruto announced as he looked at Kabuto. "But I'm not completely ignorant of him." Kabuto makes it a point to show them the seal. Kabuto looked at Naruto with his smile, as he lifted his shirt, revealing a circle of seals spread across his stomach and chest. "If I betray Naruto in the slightest, this seal will lock my muscles." Kabuto looked at Kakashi with a small glare. "And I'd rather be able to move." Hinata suddenly jumped from her place next to Hayashi to Naruto. "I want to go with Naruto." Everyone looked at Hinata in surprise. "Not Hinata this time," Naruto said as he gently nudged Hinata towards her father. "Why not Naruto?" This time the question came from Hayashi. "Because I have things I need to do." Naruto hugged Hinata to stop her from protesting. That, and she hasn't seen her village in a while, and as an ambassador, she needs to see both villages. Naruto gave Hinata a quick kiss on the lips as he leaned in and whispered in her ear. "Also, I'll have a surprise for you the next time I see you again." Naruto gave Hinata a giant hug as she turned and skipped to her father. "See you soon." With that, Naruto and his group disappeared, leaving the group from Suna and Konoha behind. "Be careful, Naruto," Hinata thought as they headed towards Hai no Kuni, Land of Fire. Triple X. Madara watched as the Hachibi's ceiling began before walking away from the scene. "So you're going to Konoha?" He turned to see Sasuke looking at him. "Do you mind if I accompany you?" "Yes, you're needed here," Madara stated emotionlessly. "I need to get in and out quickly without alerting anyone to my presence." Madara turned away, but said one last thing. "Also, you need to train because I'm sending you to capture the Kyuubi." With that, Madara disappeared into a vortex, leaving a grinning Sasuke behind. "Soon, Naruto," Sasuke said as he turned and headed into the dark cave. "I'll have my revenge soon." Triple X. One day later, Naruto arrived in Uzushiogakure with a look of determination and planning. "What are you thinking, Naruto?" Naruto looked at Yukaken. Before Naruto could respond, Emitsuki suddenly appeared in front of them. "There you are, Ishiki." Yukaken looked around as Enmitsuki grabbed his arm and began to pull him away. "You know I'm not Ishiki," Yukaken announced with a nervous smile. "Well, you're part of it." And Mitsuki said with a kind smile, "And that's good enough for me. Come on. I need help playing with these kids." Naruto, Haku, and Kabuto just watched as Yukaken was dragged towards the children of Uchiha. Kabuto took this as an excuse to leave to find new recruits for the Uchiha ninja force. Haku went with him to look after him. "I'm sorry, guys," Naruto thought with sadness in his eyes. "But I have to do whatever it takes." With that, Naruto walked toward the tower with determination in his eyes. Naruto was waiting with his bodyguards, Haku and Kabuto, as they bid their farewells to Uchiha. The three left the village in a swirl of water when they reappeared on the opposite side of the lake. "So you're ready for the plan?" Haku looked at Kabuto, who nodded. "Yes. But remember your part in all of this." Kabuto placed his hand on Naruto's shoulder. "You just have to keep this little one in this form until Naruto and Yukaken return from whatever they're doing." Kabuto looked toward the forest when he saw the fading images of Naruto and Yukaken. "Come on. Let's go before we get late." Haku nodded, and the three of them walked toward the Kage meeting. XXX. Madara watched as Tsunade left the village with her bodyguards, leaving Kakashi in charge until she returned. "You couldn't have made it easier." Beneath his mask, Madara smiled. "Soon I will have all the power necessary to rule the world." With that, Madara disappeared into a vortex. XXX. "Why are we doing this?" Yukaken asked. "Because we have to prevent them from obtaining the Hachibi," Naruto said simply as he ducked under a tree branch. "But there's something else to this that isn't there." Yukaken looked at Naruto suspiciously. "Karabi pushed me off the cliff," Naruto said as he began to pick up speed. "I won't let him die because of me." Yukaken still had a worried look on her face as she followed Naruto. "That's not what Naruto was talking about." Yukaken looked at Naruto with a sad look in his eyes. "The man we're going after killed Jiraiya. What I asked was, are you doing this for Karabi's sake or to get revenge on your sensei?" XXX. Pain watched as the Hachibi slowly retreated from its host with some difficulty. It seems these two refused to give up. Pain looked at Sasuke only to see him walk away with a bored expression on his face. "Where do you think you're going, Uchiha?" Sasuke turned and smiled at Pain. "This is the work of weaklings." Sasuke smiled even wider when Konan looked at him. "I'm an Uchiha, the best in the world. I don't do heavy lifting." With that, Sasuke turned and walked away without another word. "Do you want me to go find him?" Konan asked as she watched the Uchiha disappear. Pain simply shook his head as he maintained his concentration on the ceiling. "We need to keep our focus on the ceiling." Pain looked at Konan and saw her nod. "But after that, we'll deal with Sasuke." Zetsu looked at Pain and Konan with a mysterious glint in his eyes, but he kept his attention on the ceiling. XXX. Day after, Naruto and Yukaken looked back at the village of Amigakure with vague expressions. "It's not what I imagined," Yukaken declared as she watched Naruto walk down the mountain they were on. "Wait, do you even know where you're going?" Naruto didn't stop his descent, but turned his head until one eye looked at Yukaken. "Yes, I do," Naruto said simply as his blue eye turned orange before looking at AIM. Naruto landed on the outskirts of AIM and looked around until he felt the precise emotion he was looking for. "It's this way." Naruto walked with Yukaken until they found a small cave with a rock in front of it. "They're here," Naruto said as he grabbed the rock and threw it without any care for stealth. "Naruto!" Yukaken reached out to grab Naruto only for him to enter the cave. "They already know we're here," Naruto said as he walked into the darkness, with Yukaken following him. "Besides, we can't be calm in this situation." XXX. Karabi's body gave one last heave as the bijou was ripped from him. He fell to the ground as Pain walked towards him, his hand outstretched to pick up his corpse, but was forced to dodge a lightning bolt. "You came faster than I expected, Jinchuriki," Pain said as Naruto appeared between him and Karabi's body. "You can't help him anymore." Naruto just glanced at Karabi as he covered himself in Kyuubi's chakra. "See, that's where you're wrong." Pain watched as the Kyuubi's cloak seemed to snake its way around Karabi's body until it was covered. Pain held up his hand to stop Konan and Zetsu from attacking Naruto as Naruto walked backwards towards Karabi, keeping an eye on the Akatsuki members. Come on, you big idiot, you can't sleep now. Naruto looked at Kurabi, and just as Pain was about to speak, he saw Kurabi's chest rise and fall. Impossible, Pain thought as he glanced at Konan out of the corner of his eye. Only someone who has complete control over Yotan, yang release, can bring someone back to life. Pain narrowed his eyes at Naruto. It's simply pumping the Kyuubi's yang chakra into the body. It's not controlled enough to bring back a completely dead person, but if they died recently, then it would be possible. Kurabi groaned as she looked at Naruto. Hey, what took you so long? Naruto smiled at the man as Yukaken appeared behind him. Yukaken, you know what to do. Naruto stood up as he stepped over Kurabi and looked at Pain. I'm not leaving Dashta. Naruto turned to Yukaken and released Kyuubi's chakra, stopping him mid-sentence. You'll take Kurabi and reach Tetsu no Kuni, Land of Iron. Naruto looked him straight in the eyes. I'll be fine, just go. Yukaken opened his mouth to argue further, but he knew nothing would change Naruto's mind. Yukaken lifted Kurabi and turned around only to be confronted by Konan. Move out of the way. Yukaken growled as Konan began to peel like paper. Yukaken reached for his sword as Konan spread her paper wings. I won't ask again. Konan, leave him alone. Pain spoke, his voice echoing off the walls. We already have everything we need from him, and even if he brings reinforcements, it will be too late. Konan nodded and stepped out of Yukaken's way. Yukaken smiled at Naruto as he walked by. You'd better get back. I don't want to face a certain someone if you don't. Naruto nodded. Yukaken started to leave, but Zetsu appeared in front of him with his vines wrapped around Yukaken. Zetsu, leave him alone. Pain narrowed his eyes at Zetsu, who just smiled at Pain. I don't think Madara would like that. Zetsu made his vines surround Yukaken, but suddenly his vines were torn apart by a blur of movement. I hate talking plants, Yukaken said as he looked at Zetsu. It's so unnatural. With that, Yukaken disappeared and reappeared behind Zetsu and continued walking. Zetsu turned to attack with his vines, but fell to the ground. He looked and saw that Yukaken had cut him in half. Good luck, Naruto. Yukaken disappeared into a swirl of water, leaving a grinning Naruto behind. Fuck, that was fast, Zetsu announced as he grabbed her legs and slammed the two halves together. Naruto watched as Zetsu began to stand up while the cut on her waist began to heal. I need to go tell Madara about this. Well, some aloe vera man, Naruto commented, causing Zetsu to stop in his tracks. I'll be sure to deal with Madara once I'm done here. Naruto kept his eyes fixed on Pain's as Zetsu sank into the ground. Overconfident little brat, Zetsu thought with a frown as he went to find Madara. Now that he's gone, how about we take this somewhere else? Naruto said, gesturing toward the cave door. If we fight here, we might end up destroying Amigakure, and I don't know about you, but I take no pleasure in hurting others. Before Pain could speak, Naruto disappeared in a flash of light, leaving Pain and Konan to follow.